We are live here at MythVision Podcast, and 30 arguments against the existence of God with Jonathan MS Pearce, author, writer, badass. We are MythVision. Welcome back to MythVision Podcast. Are you tired of people knocking on your door to tell you what you need to believe? Anyway, welcome back, Jonathan MS Pearce. I want everyone to know real quick, you got the blog, obviously. They can go. Everybody's writing on here, but yours also. You contribute a lot to this, correct?
Yep. I like to think I do. There are an awful lot of writers there. You know, Ehrman, Phil Zuckerman, all sorts of great minds and writers. Loads of fantastic variety, and I'm one of the voices in there.
And then the book we're talking about today is 30 Arguments Against the Existence of God, Heaven, Hell, Satan, and Divine Design. I want to, obviously, maybe we can get through all 30 arguments briefly somehow, but some of them take a little extra time to get into. So if we don't get through all of them today, we might make a part 2 happen on this particular subject. And hey, why not? Let everyone know about the book twice.
So, I think a wonderful thing about sort of books like this, or at least ideas like this, is that they can go down many rabbit holes, and that's great, because once you start thinking about one argument, it leads to another, and then they're connected ones. So yeah.
Well, that's another thing too. Like, it's not just about me and you. If anyone in the audience, like, they contribute with the super chats, I always thank you for that. But they involve themselves in the conversation. They may have questions. They may want to go down a rabbit hole, whatever. That's an option too. So sometimes they might cause us to have a part 2 or a part 3 of the show itself. So
bring it on. But
get you a copy of the book. This is the brand new one, the latest and the greatest. Dan Barker wrote the foreword, and let me tell you, he's funny. I mean, he attacked everything you said and said the same thing that you said right after you said it. And it's like, so it's just, he's a really funny writer, and I really enjoyed this. This has been a blast reading. Also, the MythVision Patreon, just so you know, if you're looking for a way out of hell, we are selling indulgences here. You could do it with a simple entry. Don't worry, continue in all the iniquities that you want to act in. All your sins are covered. Just join the Patreon. We have tons of stuff. I work my butt off. I release early access, and that's enough about me and enough about plugging. Just so you know, it's all in the description. Jonathan, where do we start with this big matter? Because I guess someone goes, what is God? Like, what do you mean?
Yeah, just before we start, I mean, thanks for calling me a badass. I've been called a lot of things in my life, but never a badass. It's hardly justified, but yes.
No, I see through. I see it.
Yeah, I feel it. This book came out of a lot of past writing I've done, and arguments I've given in public talks and all sorts of stuff. So, with my philosophical wranglings about what God is, and this is why I put God in inverted commas, in sort of scare quotes, because the idea, I remember giving a talk involving some of these arguments years back. I used to do a talk called God on Trial, and I used to present 5 philosophical arguments against God, and people would challenge you, but that's not my understanding of God. And it's like, well, there are so many versions of God, as many as there are believers, that you've got to say, well, what are the most obvious commonalities that we have? And I think so. For me, I always choose the God of classical theism, which is what I call OmniGod, which is a God of omniscience, or being all knowing, omnipotence, all powerful, and omnibenevolence, which is being all loving. And wrapped inside of those is divine foreknowledge. So often,
Right.
people will believe in the full divine foreknowledge of God, knowing all future events. So that's what I really start with. So how do these omni characteristics work together, and how do they work with the data of the world around us? And we can talk about like deductive arguments, but I think, there are ways round. Christians have ways around deductive arguments. So I think abductive arguments, which are the inference to the best explanation, are really useful. Really cumulative arguments saying that, well, what's this God most likely? What's his data, or what's this characteristic of God most likely explained by, or this characteristic of reality best explained by? Atheism or theism? Atheism.
So you want to make it clear in the book, you pick a God, and the God you want to pick is the most common. Nobody wants to go find a little tribal clay deity that's on a totem pole that 300 people on planet Earth believe. You might have more of a chance of existing actually through all your arguments than the one.
So what happens is it's very much like the con man's pea shell game, where they put a pea under a shell or a cup or whatever, and they move it around, and it's like, whenever you present an argument against God, the theist comes back and says, okay, well, my God's not quite that, it's like this, and it's all about sleight of hand. And then say, okay, but if God's like that, then what about this? And then they move God again, and eventually they move God so many times that at least one of their answers that they give, or sleight of hands that they use, is actually not consistent with another one that they've used. And in fact, they tie themselves in knots and say, well, actually, that solution that you've given there to this problem is not a solution you can give to that problem, and that it's actually they're mutually exclusive. So I think I think that they can be pretty slippery theists when it comes to getting themselves out of these issues.
Are you trying to equate them to the serpent? Anyway, no. So we have addressed the kind of God we want to deal with is pretty much the common conception of the deity that is in Abrahamic faiths, especially since philosophy has had its hands all over this God. And you actually give a great shout out to Francesca Stavrakopoulou in your opening. I really appreciate that. I think more people need to be aware of this God so they understand God in his context, not after Plato or Paul or whoever else has got their hands on him. Even the priestly source doesn't quite do what ends up becoming. So
that's a really good point, actually, and that's probably a great place to start, which is in this book, I found this really, really difficult, is I choose it as a pronoun for God, right? And I had to really, there are so many times where you just automatically write he, which is whenever you're talking about God, it's he. And I really wanted to work really hard to make sure it was a pronoun I really consistently used everywhere, apart from a small bit about rape later on. But that was quite difficult because we're so used to that. And actually that connects to what God and Anatomy, the book that you just showed. Mm-hmm. I think there's a real tension between modern Christians and the Bible, because as she shows so well in that book, God had a body and had a corporeal existence that is very clearly evidenced in the Hebrew Bible. Mm-hmm. And what happened is through, the use of philosophy over time, that God became abstracted away from being a God that walks among us and talks to us and shows his butt cheeks to us and all the sorts of things that she shows in that, these really uncomfortable excerpts for the Christian. And humanity has abstracted God out of that context to be this abstract entity that most modern Christians understand of God. And then what they have to do is, because this God has been so abstracted out of that context, so that it now sits outside of time, outside of the universe, and is just responsible for kind of creating the universe and everything in a more abstract sense. They then have to say, but I still believe the Hebrew Bible, and have to go back to that ancient text and say, oh, okay, I've got this abstract idea of God, but I need to marry that with this God that walks among us and has a body. And there's a real tension, I think, there for modern Christians.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you. I like how you put it in your book. You talk about him hiding behind a mountain, and then it becomes from a mountain to a cloud. And then from a cloud, it becomes, well, maybe the clouds play a role in the mountains because they're up there, they're up high, right? But that progressive he's getting a little further, we get there and then we find out he's further. It's almost like the Christian, I can't remember the astronaut who was taking the mission to the moon and looking out there and doesn't see God, he must be further out. He's got to be, so I really appreciate that.
It's like a playground argument. I often analogize, which is to say that, you're having an argument about my God's better than your God. It's like, yeah, but my God's, over there, my God, your God's this, well, my God's that times 10. Well, my God's that times infinity. Mine's that times infinity plus 1. Mine's that times infinity to the power of infinity, like you did on the school playground. Right. And then it's like, eventually God is not just like any pantheon of gods. You have gods that have different skills. Well, God is eventually, abstracted to have all of these skills and all of these strengths, and therefore omnipotence and omnibenevolence and omniscience, and it's all encased in one entity. And so so you can see that abstraction of all these kind of characteristics into one supreme and perfect entity, which exists, as you say, out there.
So before we dive into the book itself, because the first thing we're going to deal with is the first chapter. Why would God create at all? I mean, I'd like to chip away at these things as we go. I want people to understand you are a philosopher, and I'm going to get the super chats here in just a second. Thank you all for the support. I want to mention, I said this the other night. I had a conversation with a Calvinist. He's actually like a Jordan Peterson philosophy type of Calvinist. And we were talking about God, and he wanted to get all woo-woo and word salad and deep and philosophical and this and that. And I'm not a big philosopher, Jonathan. I'm not going to lie. But I told him, see, I'm starting somewhere else. If I want to know about the God of the Hebrew Bible, I'm going to look at the context, the culture, the text, the literature, the ancient Near Eastern context, the region, what's going on at this place, this time, and compare it to the zeitgeist of its era, rather than start with, what's the most unbelievable philosophical thing I could think of that is amazing and mighty. I'm going to apply that onto my deity because I already imagine and believe that that's my God. So now I'm going to apply something that's cogent and find a way to make it happen. This has happened, I think, with an atheist guy who was, I think it was a Gnostic atheist. The guy that I told you I wanted to have you have a conversation with, but became a Muslim.
Right. Yeah.
You know who I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And he did it because he started with philosophy. But I'm like, have you ever looked at any textual criticism, source material for the Quran, like the human fingerprints? So we're starting in different areas, but you're a philosopher. So this will be fun to do, to have you as a philosopher show us the problems. Whereas I can look at it like anthropologically and look at this and say, the development, there's flaws, it's human. Look at this. He looks like Baal. He had a wife. You mentioned that as well in your book. I'm just saying, You're going to take it from a different angle.
Yeah, and that reminds me, I mean, this is nothing to do with this book, but I have like sort of natural theology books. So one of my earlier books is What Did God Create the Universe from Nothing? So countering William Lane Craig's Kalam cosmological argument. So I used to be incredibly obsessed with the Kalam. So that's not the sort of stuff that this book has got, but that's a really, it just reminds me, because a lot of Muslims go to the KCA, the Kalam, as a kind of stall, as a foundation stone for sort of arguing to their God, or certainly theism. And it's just such a problematic argument for a whole bunch of reasons, but that's a whole different story.
All right. Vaguely agnostic, thank you for that super chat. A meme I saw today pointed out that God created a light source that gives us cancer. Dude, thought I would pass it on.
That is brilliant. Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Vaguely. I appreciate the support and the 666.
Look, what's really, so here's a already you can start. We haven't even properly started, and there's a rabbit hole. What the thing about theism is, you have to explain every single bit of data in existence in light of OmniGod. So that's a really good point that expresses that nicely, which is, you think, oh, God's created the sun, brilliant, sun gives us cancer. Okay, you now have to, I mean, we don't have to explain that. Shit happens. Like the universe, it doesn't need to be loving. But if you believe in an all-loving God, straight away you have to explain that. You have to explain that, and then this becomes a problem of evil. And they say, well, there might be a reason, there could be a reason, and that's all they revert to, which is the possibility ergo probability. It's possibly an answer for that, so therefore it is the answer. Do you know what I mean?
The sin went into hyperdrive because of our sin. The sun went into hyperdrive. That's why. There's always some explanation, or maybe it's beyond our understanding, but it fits into God's plan. Let me tell you, buddy. Doc Pluromana, thank you so much for the support. Good to see everybody here tonight, too.
Yeah.
The scandal of particularity is not solved when the parochial tribal god of Yahweh is no different than Shamash or Asher, etc.
Yep. I got no. Yeah, absolutely. you have, but then some theists will say, well, some kind of not universalists in that sense, but people that say that there are, in all of these different religions, there are elements access to the God, and there are arguments that Christians or theists might use in that context.
Yeah, theirs is better. Don't you forget. Crawford Fulton King, thank you for that super chat. No question, just saying hi to both of you and everyone on chat. And I'm 10 minutes behind on YouTube on me telly. Well,
on the telly. That's
on the telly.
That's on the telly. Yeah.
Thank you so much for the support, and thank you for that. Everybody give Crawford a shout out. And I love it when I see like people who are fans of what we do, even just complimenting people who are super chatting and showing them love for the support, because I know that everybody's money's hard earned. I know how difficult this stuff is, and I do appreciate it. This is a full-time gig for me. So first argument.
Okay.
First idea.
Absolutely. So the first idea is, why create anything at all? And I think that that's a good place to start. So why create anything at all? So if you have OmniGod, who is, there's something called perfect being theology, arrived at through the ontological argument. This argument that certain theists use to argue towards to logically poof God into existence, right? So the idea is that God is perfect in some sense of the word, and I think that's a thoroughly problematic word anyway, but we'll just park that for a bit. Now, if God is absolute perfection, so causally prior to creating the universe, God just exists in what we might call God world, right? There's nothing else, no other contingent entities exist, just God. God would be ontologically perfect. So God would have no needs, no desires, no lacks, because to need something or to desire something is not to have it, is to have a lack. And so therefore, the question is, well, if you are in ontological perfection, why would you want to create anything that shows you've got a need or a lack? And not only that, but that which you create appears to be necessarily a degradation of perfection. Right, because you only have to look at Adam and Eve and their cock up in the Garden of Eden as to say, well, this is clearly not perfection, right? So this is not, which brings me on to another argument which I'll bring in later, or several arguments I'll bring in later. But you get this understanding that this idea that that God would have no need to create, just like, and therefore. But God has created, and so therefore we've got something odd here. So what's going on? Why did God create? I mean, what would you, when you were a Christian, how would you sort of argue for why God would create?
Well, I had an argument specifically funneled eventually through Calvinism, which then what I did is I tried to express, I mean, there was a way of me trying to connect the idea that God cared enough about us, his chosen, by the way. It wasn't everybody. I found a way to make it make sense because I was an elect, duh. So it has to matter for me, of course. I know I was lucky, 1 out of a million, but the one reason I'd run to like Romans 9. I know that's weird, but that's a Calvinist hotspot. And I would go, well, God has to make something that he's able to somehow show his attributes. So he can't show his attributes if there isn't something there. Now, I started with a lot of assumptions, even with this. Just why does he have to show attributes? But he wants to show who he is. So how does he do that? Well, he wants to show his mercy and he wants to show his wrath, his power. And so how he does that is he creates objects for mercy, objects for wrath. Now, before
but I see, as that just, it's red flag,
right.
Red flag to a bull.
Same here.
Anyway, I'd be questioning. It's always about questioning the why. So why would he need to show his, like you were saying, why would he need to show his mercy? Why would he need to show his power and wrath? Like, why would a perfect being need to show power? Like, what are they trying to prove? And who to? Because if they are the only thing that exists, they don't need to prove anything to anyone because they already know. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I mean, and this is a question I think even sometimes Christians ask, like that they'll maybe have an answer, well, because of his son or whatever. They'll have some, it doesn't answer the ultimate why. And even they will ask, like, I'm not sure why he created it this way. Because when you pin them down and you go, like, we get into the hell and who's going where and why did he create a place like this? And why did he create Satan knowing he's going to fall? Because we have these omnis. They don't understand, but they just trust God. Well, why did my aunt die of brain cancer? Well, I'll tell you why. God has a plan. They don't know why, and they're comfortable with not really knowing why.
Yeah.
So
and that's what it always comes down back to, is this kind of skeptical theism. This appeal to, like, oh, it's beyond our ken. We don't know why, but there might be a reason, therefore there is a reason. And that's basically what most of theism appears to just entirely rely on.
Right.
So the argument I've heard back that seems to make the most sense but doesn't make any sense is that God creates because he has a superfluity of love. There's so much, God has so much love, it's that he has superfluous love existing somehow in God world. God just has too much love, a bit like an overflowing glass. So he exists as this overflowing glass that overflows with love, and so therefore that is a creative impetus that God had. I mean, this is I've had theologian friends who have expressed this to me, and in fact, I was watching a Jewish rabbi talk about this in a talk the other day, and just thinking, hang on, so if you have so much love that you need to create, and then you create tidal waves, tsunamis that kill 240,000 people, and that overflowing love is cancer, from the sun that you've created, or just from other stuff, and disease and murder and rape. It's like, I'm sorry, that argument just, that doesn't work for me. It's the superfluid. If I was overflowing with love, I then wouldn't need to try and explain myself to explain why that overflowing love creates so much death, pain, and suffering.
It's almost, and then what typically happens, and I'm going to track with you on this just to play along with this and show the problems. I've thought about this as well. You probably have. Imagine back when Stalin's ruling and he has all these starving people. Let's say they're caged. He puts them in there. Okay. They're in this place. They can't get out. They're starving to death, and there's just enough food to keep, let's say 75% of them alive. Now they have to kill each other for it, and they're getting sick, and there's illnesses, but none of them is blaming the person who technically puts them in the cage to begin with. They always find an excuse to blame the person who's starving next to them and the other person who's in the same situation they're in. And they never actually are blaming the very thing they're saying exists as the example of love. You see the problem I'm going down?
Yeah. So this is a really common, so basically theodicy. So the problem of evil is, why is there so much evil and suffering in the world, given that God is all loving, which means he would care enough to do something about it, all powerful enough to do something about it, and all knowing, knows what to do about it. But why is there still all this pain and suffering? And it's this idea that these theodicies, which are kind of defenses and excuses for how God, explaining why this suffering is there, it's always about blaming something other than God, because God can't be responsible for, even though God is a necessary being supposedly that creates everything in existence.
And that's it. That is only saying that God exists to begin with, because there's a Christian going, you're blaming God, you're mad at God. No, we're trying to say, using your framework, your model, like, how do you not see that conclusion? That's why I had to interrupt to make that point, because I know Christians will do that. I used to do it myself. Well, you're mad at God. That's why you're saying that God's at fault. And it's like, no, using that framework, using your understanding that this God is in control, this God created, but he's not responsible.
Yeah,
he's really not
responsible. We will definitely get it. So these are some of the early arguments.
I'm sorry, I'm already
no. But you're absolutely right.
You want to get this super chat real quick then?
Yeah, go for it.
Abros, thank you so much, my brother. Love you, man. Thank you for the super chat. It's not logically proofing.
No, because I said poofing, like magic.
Poofing. Oh, I'm sorry. Logically poofing something into existence. I'm earnestly waiting to see if you can offer a genuine refutation of God, of natural theology.
Well, this is essentially what we will be doing the whole episode. But the natural theology covers all sorts of different arguments, including because I was wondering if someone would say, "Oh, natural theology." That's like the Kalam cosmological argument is a foundation of natural theology. So there's a book, but to deal with that takes about 6 hours of talking, and then you get the ontological argument, all these arguments. So it's like you take the Blackwell companion to natural theology and you say, oh, I refute that. Yeah, that takes like 20 hours to read, like, let alone beginning to refute that. So, all in good time, but we will be concentrating on a lot of arguments that will be under the umbrella of natural theology. And of course, you know, the problem is that if you're in my opinion, if you're a Christian, for example, like, not only do you have all the historical arguments that you and I have spent so long talking about, you know, the resurrection and the nativity, and I'm writing a book on the Exodus at the moment. Not only do you have all those theological, exegetical, historical problems, but you have to be able to answer all of these as well. Like the hoops you have to jump through to get to Christianity as a rational belief. But it's mind-boggling. Like I can't get past that. So let alone, you know, the resurrection and nativity issues. I mean, it's just the problems of legion.
Right. Yeah. Thank you, Avarice, for the super chat, my friend. Stay tuned.
So the next argument is God is a poor designer. And let's talk about Adam and Eve here for a start. So if you believe in Adam and Eve, it depends, you know, where you go. So some Christians will say, "Oh, they're only symbolic beings," but then it's like, well, how does that fit with original sin? You know, how is this all? Is the whole symbolic, literal tension that you get? It's like, well, how far do you take back your symbolism when? So that
I just want people to at least see this. I have the book, so anyway.
Yeah, so there's also an awful lot of different sort of natural theological arguments going on here, but in terms of this design of Adam and Eve, let's assume a literal Adam and Eve for the sake of argument at the moment. If God created Adam and Eve, now you have this dilemma here. So if God created Adam and Eve, right, and original sin, and we're that gets into the world, and we're all being punished on account of, you know, sin being in the world and the fall of humanity, the fall of man. If Adam and Eve, you know, ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and they made that decision that was a bad decision, and we are all now getting punished on account of that, the question is, are they representative of humanity? So Derek, if you were in that same situation and you also ate from that tree, then actually it's fair that we're all kind of punished on account of what Adam and Eve did, because actually we all would have done the same. Okay. And then the other side of the coin is, well, if Derek, you had been in that same situation and you didn't, and you chose not to do that because you're obeying God, then they are not representative of humanity. So you've got these two problems. If all humans would make that same mistake, then we've got a design problem going on here, because God has created, we didn't design ourselves. We don't have responsibility for designing ourselves and what we do. And if all humans in that given situation would have done the same, then which is required by Adam and Eve being representative of humanity, then that's poor design. That's unmistakably poor design. Now, if they're not representative of us, so Derek would have been a good boy and not chosen that fruit, then it's completely unfair that God has created two people that caused the fall of man, and who aren't representative of humanity. So it's a real problem. You've either got poor design or you've got God being unfair. And I don't think there's particularly a way around this, unless you go down the real symbolic route, in which case, well, what's the point of the whole story, really? Is it just saying humans are naturally depraved or naturally, you know, morally evil? Well, then that's a bit of a design fault.
Then you kind of wonder, like, getting to Jesus, this is the problem later, is like, died for all man's sins. Where did sin enter the world? Like, did these New Testament authors actually believe the story of Genesis literally? It seems like Paul did. So there's all these problems. Like we're all sophisticated somewhat. I think most people are trying to be in 2022, at least the theologians that I want to talk to that are, you know, trying to stay up to speed with science and their religion.
Yeah.
They're trying to stay up to speed. You know, yeah, we're cool with Genesis being a mythology. It's not, it's allegory, it's mythology, but then they get to Jesus and, we got to be very careful. Oftentimes we got to watch out what we say and be, but Paul believed that. Paul believed this, you know, he knows about Adam, and is that all symbolic for him as well? Then did Jesus really have to die then? Like, we got all these questions that start coming up.
I understand why Christians feel the need to be hyper-literalist, because if you start pulling the symbolic card out, then actually it falls down like a house of cards, the whole edifice. And I think So I understand why they feel the need to go, oh no, it's got to be true, because then it's if you start saying, well, that's some symbolism and that's allegory, then how do you know what's what, and how much is really important to be historically true, and how much can you get away with there being symbolism? You know, when it comes to the Exodus, how much has to be true? You know, when you if Jesus is fulfilling every jot and tittle of the law, then actually the law is really super important. But then how much of that is symbolism? How much of that is actual history? And it's all a murky sort of quagmire.
Right. Depends on the person you ask, and how much they want to accept as this or that. And each person has kind of that threshold of what they're willing to allow to be, well, that's allegory. And I don't like that idea. Let's change it. But
so, yeah.
I do like how you put Adam and Eve, though. I do. That makes a lot of sense. If you take the story at face value, you either have one or the other. And then the other idea I was going to say about that, just to add in foreknowledge, like imagine he didn't know what was going to happen, but he did it anyway. Wouldn't he? Wouldn't you think someone who didn't know, granting open theism for a second on this idea, wouldn't you think if he was all loving, he'd have gone, you know what, I screwed up. I learned from my lesson. Scratch. Let's end Adam and Eve. Start over with two people who will get it this time. No. Let's keep the ball rolling and let's flood everybody a few chapters later. Only certain people, you know, it's kind of.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I forgot to mention this, but it's something I also talk about in there, which is divine foreknowledge, which is if God actually knew what Adam and Eve would do, then I don't understand what's going on here. So if they're getting the blame for the fall of man, or of, you know, there's some kind of connection between what happens thereon and Adam and Eve's actions, and God knew that in advance and knew exactly what they would do, and yet creates them anyway, and he creates them such that they do that, then he is morally responsible. And this is again an argument I'll come on to in a second in a different form, but he is morally culpable for what they did, so therefore he's morally culpable for the fall of man, as you would expect an ultimate creator God to be. I mean, it's this problem that Christians or theists have with trying to extricate God from this creative sovereignty and take him out of that as being morally responsible for that which he creates. And I don't think you can do that. And I think that's a fundamental flaw in the theology.
That's why they come up with different things. Libertarian free will. That's the ticket. Or they'll find ways to have these internal fights in Calvinism of infralapsarianism and superlapsarian. Well, God let one free choice happen. Like, there are Calvinists that sound like they're willing to let libertarian free will be the case for like the first decision ever made. And guess what? Man made the wrong choice right out the gate. Now it's all predestined. And there's some who say it was started from, that's where I was, superlapsarian. I said God predetermined it before, because it just didn't make any sense. It would seem like a cop out to try and get God,
but even if you have libertarian free will, which I completely dispute 100%, it doesn't make any philosophical sense. But if you allow for that, and then God still knows the future actions of freely willed decisions, then it doesn't matter whether you got libertarian free will or not. God knows what Adam and Eve would do. He created them in such a way that they would do that, and knew that they would do that, and he knew before he created them that they would do that, but he still created them anyway. So he's still responsible for that taking place. Like, if he hadn't created them, that wouldn't have taken place.
Right. And this is that question you asked earlier, like, why did he create anything? And this is another interesting question. We're talking about heaven and earth and all that. But like, why did he create hell? Why did he have to have a place? We haven't got there yet.
We'll come on to that.
Okay,
I mean,
okay. Let me get these few super chats and we'll keep moving. This is awesome. We're 33 minutes in. Somebody's got to get crucified soon.
I'm on chapter 2 only.
There's only 28 more to go. Doc Pluromana, thank you for that super chat, my friend. Ball out equals unknown purpose defense.
Bail out.
See, I'm too far away from the screen. Unknown purpose defense. Although God wants Christians to be clear about morality, salvation, and believe, he has some other unknown desire which conflicts with that one and overrides it.
I mean, it's the whole problem with God is an epistemological problem. And this is the divine command theory issues with that, which is, you know, how do you know that you got the right God? How do you know what commands God is actually, you know, how do you know you got the right interpretation of those commands, or the right commands at all? And so, you know, and so Christians, you know, they will posit some kind of purpose or some kind of this or that. It's an epistemological nightmare.
Thank you so much for that, Doc. I hope that answered your question. And
Probably
Shadow Vein, thank you for the $3 super sticker. Appreciate the love and the support, everybody. Awesome. All right. So are we finally in chapter 3?
So no, the last thing I want to say about poor design, we're still on chapter 2.
Okay.
The poor design issue is that, okay, so not only is he designed Adam and Eve poorly because they are representative of humanity and they've done this bad thing and God knew that. And let's throw in a little bonus here because they were punished for eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So before they took that fruit, they didn't have knowledge of good and evil. Right, so God has commanded them. I mean, this is a fundamental flaw with the story of Adam and Eve.
Right. I get where you're going with this.
so God says, by the way, don't eat from that tree. Right? They have no knowledge of good and evil, so therefore, eating from that tree is neither good nor evil. It is morally neutral. For them, they don't know. They have no knowledge of good and evil. So then they're like, oh, let's eat from this tree. God's told us not to. Nah, I don't know what's good and evil. Right? I literally don't know what is good and bad. Right. So they take from that tree, and then they get the knowledge of good and evil. But when they took that tree and ate from it, they didn't have that knowledge. So therefore, they weren't morally culpable for what they did.
Christians will argue. You know what they'll argue? Well, there was one command: don't do this. But if there was never guilt, they don't understand what that is. And someone else tells them, let's just say there were two voices. You don't know right. I don't know right. You don't know wrong. I don't know wrong. And someone says, don't do this. But then someone comes along, another voice. We don't know guilt. We don't know negative. We don't know, and another voice comes on and says, actually, yeah, you should eat it. We got two equal voices. It looks good for food. Well, we've been eating food in here since this whole time. You know what? Eat on even playing field, not knowing the repercussions, and then you ate. Boom. So your point is well taken. I just wanted to paint a picture and then it gets worse when he says, well, you know what? I'm not only doing that, kick them out. Don't let them live forever, actually. So now they can't even access the tree of life.
So, I mean, but that's the kind of thing you'd expect, given that it's a completely mythological tale, and you don't really need to cross the T's and dot the I's. And it's just, it's a tale that gets generated over time and place and whatnot.
We're taking it all the way, though.
But if you're hyper literal, like if you're someone that says, right, this is the truth. I mean, this is how I generate the truth, or this is how I understand morality. This is how I understand God. Then you've got problems.
So, Anna Roos, real quick, you both rock. Thank you for making the world a better place. And Crawford Fulton King, I said me telly instead of my telly. Was a nod, Jonathan MS.
I know. So this will mean nothing to you, but I did get because I'm English. I knew that if he's saying tele, he's doing northern rather than telly, which is southern. And because I'm wearing a Leeds University, which is up the north of England, but he also knows that I support Portsmouth, which is down the south. So this is a whole English football accents. There's a lot of stuff you won't get in there, but I'm completely with Crawford. So
Crawford, thank you so much for the support, man. Everybody show Crawford some love in the chat. Everybody who's super chatted, thank you so much. Show them some love. All right, Jonathan.
Play up, Pompey, play up. So the other thing about divine design is an argument from not from teleology. We'll come on to that a little later. Is the argument that actually no, it is a teleological argument. So you get these teleological arguments, a teleological argument will sound something like this: living things are too well designed to have originated by chance. Therefore, life must have been created by an intelligent creator. This creator is God. That's broadly a teleological argument. It's like, it all looks designed. Paley's watchmaker argument. Right. So a disteleological argument would say something like an omnipotent, omniscient, omnibenevolent creator God would create organisms that have optimal design. Organisms has features that are suboptimal. Therefore, God either did not create these organisms or is not omnipotent, omniscient, and omnibenevolent. So this is where you look at data of the world around us and say, okay, let's look at humans. Women have narrow birth canals leading to painful births, almost akin to man flu or something. And maternal deaths, okay, that's probably not a good gag because they die from that. So you get maternal deaths from birth. You get ectopic pregnancies due to issues with the fallopian tubes and cervix. You get digestive problems. You get bad bats. You get hernias, wisdom teeth, appendix. which are, you know,
you're bringing up nightmares.
You get all these issues which are a poor design. But this is how evolution works, because it only works based on the building bricks that are already in place for it to work with. So, but if you were to start from scratch, you would design humans in a better than that, right? But you wouldn't mix up the breathing and the digestive systems, because you can easily choke. Humans can really easily choke because we use the same parts of our system to do different things. So the point here is that poor design is all over the natural world, because evolution doesn't start from scratch, and therefore it's actually quite inefficient in a big picture sense.
Right.
So if you're going to try and achieve this goal, you would start from scratch and do something else completely. But evolution can't do that. It's like it's only changing what's already in place. So if the things already in place aren't super amazing to be able to achieve this particular goal, it will achieve that goal in the best way that it can, or at least in not even in the best way often, in a way that it can and get away with doing.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? And I'm using the agency in terms of evolution, which is a real problem. But the idea is that if God is a creator of all life, then God doesn't look like a very good creator. If God is a designer of all life, he doesn't look like a very good designer, both from Adam and Eve, from a kind of theological point of view, but also from a biological point of view.
Let me take this super chat here. Avros is back. Thank you, my friend, for the 20. Seriously, appreciate you for that. Your idea of perfection is Aristotelian, but if we reject that idea of static perfection, returning to Plato's idea of perfection with God as love, eros, with yearnings himself, then what's the refutation of a necessary being?
So my idea of perfection is actually so I completely disagree with perfect being theology. So any Christian, for example, any theist that comes and says God is perfect, to me, so what I'm doing here is I'm arguing from a Christian point of view, right? I'm saying if you believe God is perfect, then this is a problem. But I would actually say God cannot be perfect, because perfect is a goal-oriented statement. So you can only. So if I picked up, say, an American football and said this is the perfect ball for American football, yeah, it is, because it's been designed for American football. But if I try and play golf with it, it's not a perfect ball for playing golf. In other words, you can't just say this is you can't, out of context, just say this is the perfect ball, because it's the perfect ball for this goal, but not for this goal. Do you know what I mean? So perfect for me is a goal-oriented statement, a goal-oriented evaluation. And so therefore, when you say God is perfect, if you don't have the context for that, this is where you get a bit geeky here. So in logic, you talk about conditional sentences, which are made up of a protasis and an apodosis. So a protasis is say, if you want this, and then you have the apodosis, which says, then you should do this, right? So if I want to play American football, then I will use this ball. So this is then this ball is perfect for playing. But what you have when you say God is perfect is you're forgetting all the if parts. Well, perfect for what and how and what? Everything perfect for killing as many people as possible, or do you know what I mean? So perfect is a really problematic statement, and I think it's fundamentally incoherent without the protasis, without the if part of the statement. Okay. I don't know if that helps. So I would say perfection. My idea of perfection is that it's goal oriented, and therefore, when Christians talk about perfect being theology, they've got a problem, because they need to establish what any given thing is being perfect for.
Okay, Avros, thank you for that super chat. I hope that somewhat answered your question there. I know it's a lot to get into, especially getting into a necessary being.
Yeah, and I think there are problems with necessary beings as well, and possible worlds, but that's a whole other rabbit, a warren of rabbit holes. Probably
maybe we'll do some more. Obviously we are going to do some more, and we can get into that, and we need to cover that other book at some point too. Yeah. Dell Bros, thank you for the super chat. Thank you, they said. And Rob Stroud,
he's one of my mates.
Oh, really? He's
a universalist idealist.
Okay. What if we are panentheism is true, and we are divine avatars of sorts that volitionally opted into the simulation to unfold and subscribed purpose. What of the Poe then?
What the problem of evil? Well, I mean, there's a whole lot of what ifs, and so this is where you have to go down the route as is anything material? Like if the fundamental idea of reality is that we are experiencing beings, then experience, he would argue, has primacy. So experience is what we definitely know happens, and that's a mental thing. So how can we prove? And it's the idea that you can't prove. There's a guy called Bernardo Cashapp.
I know exactly who he is. I've interviewed him.
So okay, so Rob, I know for
the
fact,
tree in the front yard does not exist right now until I actually experience, see it, whatnot. The reality is not real. We're living in this like the way he described it, your brain is like a pilot, but you have no sight, and it's like your perception is completely screwed up. We're just primates trying to grasp, and we've come up with ways to describe the world we're in, but we have no clue what we're talking about. We don't even know what this is on that level. But I did think something was interesting that he said. I'll mention one thing. He said, when we got into the idea of God, he goes, I think that it's a mind that does not, it's still searching. It doesn't understand everything. It's trying to figure things out. It doesn't know. So he had this idea of God that was like, it's a mind, right? It's not like written, because
he's actually he's a naturalist,
right?
Effectively, but
he believes it is not perfect. It has problems. It's trying to figure things out. That's his explanation. Anyway, I don't know.
I'll have to check that interview out. But yeah, I don't want to go down that. All I will grant, Rob, that a material reality exists is something of a leap of faith. It's a bit like you can't prove that you're not a brain in a vat, or you can't prove that you are not in the Matrix, right? So there's some element of like, yeah, but is there a good reason to think I am in the Matrix? And it's a bit like that with idealism, which is that could be an explanation, but I can't either prove it or disprove it, and I don't. But there's a whole other rabbit hole, and we probably shouldn't go down there.
Couple more super chats, if you don't mind. Oh, Flamio, thank you for the super chat. How many arguments do you have against the existence of Eris, E-R-I-S, instead of Yahweh? Yahweh is easy to destroy with logic because he is a scammer.
Very few of these are against Yahweh in the book. They are general arguments against OmniGod. There are certain biblical things I talk about a bit later with regard to the Bible explicitly, right, and also divine command theory, which don't need to be biblical, but they make the divine command theory stuff I talk about even more difficult for a theist, given that the Bible is full of really dodgy commands. So this is general OmniGod, but yeah, I do contextualize it to Yahweh or God, Christian God, but it's not necessarily so at all.
Yeah, just to repeat that, it's OmniGod. So he's very clear opening this book and saying, look, there's no way I could tackle every and all gods. I mean, everyone, it's almost like a god for each person. Each person has a conception and whatnot, but he wanted to get a most popular idea of omni this, omni that, omnibenevolent, all knowing, etc., the whole nine. And that's the God he's pretty much trying to show that it just doesn't add up. Mitch Mazarol, thank you so much for the super chat, my friend, and good to see you here. Jonathan, you've just touched on the great making properties. It would be good to hear about the issues that plague these in philosophical circles and some of the proposed theist workarounds.
Yeah, so this is to do with perfect being theology to a degree, and great making properties, and whether this is a great making property and therefore God would have it. Some people say libertarian free will is a great making property, and it's so important that humans have it, God must have it, and this is something we'll come on to. In fact, we will touch on some of this later, Mitch, so hopefully I won't touch on it explicitly as great making properties and in the context that I think you're talking about, but we will certainly visit that.
Mitch, thank you for that support, brother. I really do appreciate that. And one more here we have. Avros is back, man. Thank you so much tonight. I really appreciate it, man. Love you, dude, for real. If you have any questions or anything, message me on Messenger. You know how it is. Thanks, guys. God of Abrahamic religions is a low-hanging fruit to refute. Can you offer refutation of a morally perfect being of open theism? God does not have knowledge of future, only instantaneous. I can't even pronounce it. Instantaneous knowledge of actual light.
Okay, so Open theism is open theism is this idea that God doesn't have knowledge of freely willed decisions, right? Let's assume that there is libertarian free will. Again, doesn't exist, can't exist, completely can't exist philosophically. But if you're an open theist, you'd say, right, God created but doesn't know future freely willed decisions. Now, what this does is it renders God, if you're talking about great making properties, you are actually stripping God of great making properties. So you're saying that God doesn't actually have full divine foreknowledge, and that's a problem. If you think that is necessary, if you think that is a great making property, then God should have the greatest version of that you can imagine. So you would imagine God would have full divine foreknowledge, but doesn't. Okay, so that's a problem. But it gets worse, because it turns out that if God is just creating a bit like, I don't know, a simulation of Sim City or something, where he's like, oh, I'm just going to create this and see how it turns out, then that's just completely random. God is a random creator. But then if he's got some, like, where does he sit along that? Has he got some idea? Like, Facebook can predict human behavior better than, but Facebook supposedly on its algorithms can predict your behavior, Derek, better than your wife knows you after 300 likes on Facebook, right? So they've done some research on this, and so Facebook has
don't tell my wife that.
Well, Facebook has predictive qualities that appear to be better than human prediction, right? And we're pretty good at predicting like behavior through psychology now. We're getting better and better and better, but we're creating algorithms that are even better than that. Now, what you're saying is, if you're saying God doesn't know future freely willed decisions, then you're saying God appears to be slightly worse than Facebook, or slightly better than Facebook, or whatever. But you're really devaluing God's creative ability or God's characteristics here, to say that, oh yeah, you know, you can imagine in 100 years time that our predictive qualities would be even better than they are now, right? And if you're saying God is only that good or less good than that, then I don't know. I think open theism starts falling apart when you start realizing that God is actually not very good at guessing how humans would act.
Thank you, Avros, for that 20. There was one more that popped in. Dharma Defender, what relevance is God to my life or anything? If God existed, nothing about my life or the human condition would change in the slightest.
Correct. But it's good fun to talk about it. So don't burst my bubble, Dharma Defender. Gee whiz.
You're supposed to save the good stuff at the end. No, thanks, Dharma. I appreciate the support, my friend. Avros said, sorry, I meant actuality as opposed to potentiality means there. So
this is a different, yeah. I mean, again, it's the same sort of, I would say the same thing, which is, you know, if you're just really devaluing God's predictive abilities, and I think open theism is a problem. And I know he wanted to step away from the Abrahamic God, but open theism is also not easily evidenced in the Bible or the Quran, actually, where, you know, God's creation is a book or whatever. You know, God knows everything.
He knows it, and then he asks questions about what he doesn't know. And there's just seems maybe multiple sources going on. It's hard to know what's happening, but
he loses Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, absolutely. Again, just, you know, contradictions and problems in the Bible.
Avros, thank you for that, man. And I know you're very philosophical minded, so that's why I think he's a big he's a good friend of mine. So we'll hear more from him as time goes by, I'm sure. And
just on the bad design stuff, of course, when I umbrella, so I very quickly went over it, but think about, you know, David Attenborough is a famous documentary maker in the UK, a nature documentary maker and presenter, and he often talks about why he doesn't believe in God is, you know, God's designed this worm that can burrow into the human eye and make a small child blind, and you can think of all the most horrible things in biology, and you think God has designed that. God knows that would happen. God has designed malaria.
And if you ask a Calvinist, and depending on which one, he purposely makes it happen. So his hand's on the trigger when it's getting pulled. His hands, you know, he's active. And I don't know, man, looking back, I was like, how in the world? I just wanted to be like, you're so consumed with being like what the Bible says and what's true. And I don't care what it is. Next thing you know, you look back and you go, oh my gosh, I believed that, like, I was willing to accept that my mom might get cooked forever in the idea of eternal consciousness. Anyway.
In for a penny, in for a pound. If you're in there, then you've got to take it all on, because otherwise, I often argue that being a liberal Christian is much more difficult than being a conservative hyperliteralist, because if you're a liberal Christian, you say, yeah, I believe in the Bible, but actually it doesn't countenance slavery, and that stuff about rape is a, and you have to like gerrymander, your mentally contort and sort of jump through hoops and be able to harmonize all these issues, and it's exhausting. Whereas the hyperliteralist, Christian of the Westboro Baptist Church, who says it's all true, don't care what you say, everything's true, I'm in there, I'm not going to listen to anything you say, it's all true right from the start, I'm presuppositionalist, job done, and it says this very clearly, and that's true. And I think that's easier and in some sense more consistent. It's almost more logically consistent. Once you start with that, everything else follows. And obviously there are problems, all over that. But the idea is that being a liberal, which is the kind of Christian I prefer Christians to be, if you're going to be a Christian, please be liberal. But it's exhausting because you've got to harmonize everything with this parochial book that's 2,000 years old.
We've got 3 or 4 more super chats, dude. What do you want to do? Do you want to get the next one?
Chapter 3. No, you can do whatever you want.
Okay. No, I want to follow your footsteps, and we're having fun. There's some pretty interesting questions that come in.
Yeah, go for it. Just bring them in. Like this is a conversation between you and your watchers. So
no, I'm enjoying it. They're having some great conversation. Just so you know, we're in chapter 2. We only have, I don't know, 1, 2, 3. I don't know. There's we've
done an hour and we haven't got off chapter 2.
We're down.
Go for it.
We got just a little ways to go. It's really not that much. Come on. All right. Flamio says, you're anti-OmniGod apologetic. Don't actually target other than Yahweh. Your arguments don't apply to Azathoth because of their different properties.
Well, if they are OmniGod, it does, because God would not have any, why would God? It would absolutely. So the two, I've only really said 2 arguments so far, which is why would God create at all, and God has created, and there looks like very poor design. So forget the Adam and Eve part, just talk about the poor design in biology. That's still evidence. So if you believe in OmniGod, so if your Azathoth is an OmniGod, then we have a problem. If your Azathoth is not an OmniGod, then I'm not talking about that God.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I appreciate that super chat. Gaius Julius Windex. Don't forget the Windex. Derek, this is the Derek show like Truman. We are all NPCs secretly playing in your game. Omni is you. That movie, the Truman, that movie was a really interesting movie. Everybody was part of I think it's the one with Jim Carrey, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, and everybody's part of the whole play, and the whole world's watching him, and he has no clue any of that. That's pretty funny. It makes you think of one of my friends told me I should watch that. He said it's something relevant to waking up and realizing we've been kind of shammed into this religious worldview. But thank you so much, Gaius. I really appreciate that. Feel special. Everybody's watching me, man.
So the next chapter is this must be a perfect world. So if God is a perfect creator, and God is omnibenevolent, he won't create anything that is less than perfectly loving, right? And this is the idea that there can be no gratuitous suffering. So any suffering, any instance of suffering that is gratuitous, which means it doesn't, it doesn't serve a purpose. There's no need for it. It doesn't need to be there. Then that any instance of that disproves God's omnibenevolence, right? So are you with me so far? So that all suffering must serve a purpose,
right? It has to, or else,
God is not all loving. So when you're looking at this world, right, and God is a perfect created being, and there can be no gratuitous suffering. This has to be the most perfect world that God could create, given his all loving characteristics, right? And he's all powerful and all knowing. So therefore, given that framework, and he could create the greatest, this must be the greatest, the best possible world. If it's not the best possible world, God isn't being omnibenevolent, right? The most loving world, the most,
or he's not all powerful. And if you tried to, let's say we took a different route and said he created the world perfectly, Jonathan, but he had creatures somehow who were evil that always existed alongside him, let's say, and they came down and corrupted his good world he made, how is he all powerful? Or where's the omniscience coming in? Like there's all sorts of problems, whatever route you take.
Yeah. So what's really interesting with this argument is to say that, right, there are two options here. So either this is right now the most perfect world and always is somehow the most perfect world, or the Christian or the theist could come back and say, okay, it might not be perfect now, but it is a journey towards perfection, right? So you say, okay, the perfect isn't now, it's over there, but we're on a journey towards that. The problem is this has to, if God is all loving, this has to be the most loving journey to that perfect end destination. Do you understand that?
Yeah.
So like, if this isn't the most perfect journey towards that, so so for example, let's contextualize this with the tsunami that killed 240,000 people in 2004, right? Now that has to exist for a reason. That can't be gratuitous. That suffering, every single one of those deaths, has to be necessary for some greater good to come about. Maybe it's this perfect end destination. What the theist has to say is that if God is truly all loving, this has to be the perfect journey to a perfect place, or perfect in and of itself right now. Now, if it's a perfect journey towards this perfect place, the most loving journey, then not one human being less could die in that tsunami. So if we say 239,999 people died, well, if that could still get us to that perfect destination, then God would have had that many people dying and not one more. Do you see what I'm saying?
I get it. I'm wondering if there's some possible worlds argument that someone tries to, throw in here or something to get out of it or something. I don't know.
Yeah, so what this basically says is, because there can be no gratuitous suffering, that has to be necessarily the amount of suffering that takes place for whatever good comes about from it. So this has to be the perfect world in some sense, and this has to be the most perfect journey, which means that not one human being less could have died, and not one less animal. Bear in mind that wiped out ecosystems and all sorts.
Right.
It's like, and even like we wouldn't even know if one less dolphin had died or whatever. No one would actually know that, but there can be no lesser amount of death and suffering, because otherwise there would be that lesser amount of suffering. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
so therefore this all serves a purpose for this greater good, and therefore this is the most perfect world. You can't complain, like theists can't really complain about any amount of suffering. Like
so let's reverse that. Let's reverse and say this world isn't perfect. Let's say a theist says it's not perfect. What would your argument be back to that? Like, let's say they're like, you know what? It's not a perfect world.
So you're having to say, okay, how do we understand that in light of the fact that God is all loving, all knowing, and all powerful, and knows the future? So why would God create a world that isn't perfect?
Right.
Because if he's done that and he's allowing there to be suffering, because it's an imperfect world, that is allowing there to be suffering that doesn't need to happen, right? Then God is not omnibenevolent. That doesn't work. So I think, God can't create an imperfect world that would have, a gratuitous suffering, because then God wouldn't be omnibenevolent. That's fine. If you want to say God's created an imperfect world, that's fine, but you're going to have to lose the omnibenevolence.
Interesting. I mean, I was already seeing a path that it would have took us back to an argument we've already made. If you follow that, it's not a perfect world, or maybe you made it one, but then it fell, and all of that. There's all sorts of problems there. We do have a few super chats. Doc Pluralmanath, thank you for the super chat. Pardon the interruption, Jonathan. You are way more lucid with the Chianti.
With a Chianti.
Chianti.
He's drinking some wine.
Cheers, he says. And Mr. Monster, I recently became a card-carrying member of TST, and I would like to know your opinion and knowledge on the character of Satan.
So that's a satanic temple. We'll come on to Satan later, because that's one of my arguments, Mr. Monster. So thank you, but we will get there.
Thank you.
We will answer the question.
Thanks for the support.
Maybe not this video at this rate.
Well, this isn't the perfect video. I mean, I must admit. I mean, it's just... Well, maybe it is. Maybe it is. Maybe it is.
You are God, and so therefore I think
I was thinking you were, but if you want to join me, we can be part of the same. Okay, go ahead.
So I just think so. This has to be the perfect world, and that's a real problem because intuitively, like you look at Ukraine. So I just had an argument on Twitter the other day with someone. I mean, so many people on Twitter saying, "I'm praying for Ukraine." Oh God, I thanked Jesus when I saw this tank blown up. And like, right, let's unpick this. I mean, it's difficult on Twitter to do this, but let's unpick this because if you believe God is omnipotent, right? God could have not had Putin exist, right? But God did have Putin exist. So therefore, Putin is providing a service for God. God wants Putin to exist, and God wants this war to exist. And it's the same with any suffering that takes place. Like, God has the power to stop it. God doesn't stop it. So therefore, it is providing a service. It is providing some necessarily some greater good has to come out from it to maintain this omnibenevolent characteristic. So therefore, this war. This is where the people from Westboro Baptist Church are being kind of weirdly consistent because they're kind of celebrating God's judgment. And do you know what? That makes sense. Like, if you truly believe in OmniGod, then God's judgment is supreme and sovereign and the best, and you can't beat it. And if he decides that this war should take place and these people die, who are we to argue with God?
I was thinking of something crazy. I don't know why. Get your thoughts. What if God was omni? I'm throwing this as speculative. What if God is omnibenevolent, all-knowing, the whole omni, but deism is the case? So we'd still run into the same problems with the perfect world argument. Things like that would still be a problem, even if he's not involved or it is not involved, right? There's still the same problems. It's just trying to making an excuse for why all this crap happens, right?
So imagine it like SimCity. So you start a game of SimCity just to see how it turns out. So the problem is that if God already knows how it's going to turn out, he doesn't need to create. So this is one of my arguments, actually, which is if God has experiential knowledge, like literally, so if God can sit back and imagine how something would be, and it have the same purchase experientially as actually creating that world, then he doesn't need to create that world. He can just imagine it and go, oh yeah, that would happen. Oh yeah, that would happen. That would happen. And those people do good and those two people do bad. And he could experience it without having to create it. So therefore, by creating it, you're creating people that suffer. He doesn't have to do that because he can just imagine it.
Yeah, if imagining is even needed. Imagine, like, we're literally trying to explain something. If we have the omni, it's so beyond our comprehension that if we're grasping this, then there's a problem, right? It's just like, would he even need to imagine it, or would it be already known? Like, it would just be known that wouldn't be the case. Because
God supposedly knows all counterfactuals, which are if this happens, then that happens. So God knows all counterfactuals. This is if you believe in full divine foreknowledge.
Right.
All counterfactuals of potential creation and actual creation, and therefore, would know what would happen if any given world was created. Now, if you're going back to the deist thing, then that doesn't really work with that, or it does work, but he creates anyway. But then if he knows there's going to be suffering that doesn't need to exist and creates anyway in this kind of deistic kind of like flick of the dominoes, then is that all loving? If you're just randomly creating a universe that's going to include a load of suffering, but you didn't really need to create that universe, then you are not being omnibenevolent. So I think it still does create problems. To answer your original question.
Yeah. Thank you, Tammy, for the super sticker. And then also JM, thank you for the super chat. Appreciate y'all.
So next argument, chapter 4, is God loves abortion. So this argument is revolves around and I like this argument because it really plays with the idea that there are a lot of Christian pro-lifers or theistic pro-lifers. I keep saying Christian, that's because of the context I'm working within, who will have a go at humans for all this abortion that they advocate and all this, and murdering these human beings. Massively problematic. I've written a load on that elsewhere, but I won't go down that rabbit hole. Talk about what personhood is and why abortion is not what Christians think it is, etc., etc. But here's the rub. There's something called spontaneous or natural abortion. It turns out that somewhere between, and we're not sure because actually we just don't know how much it happens, but somewhere between 2/3 and 3/4 of all fertilized eggs do not are not viable in some way. Either they don't implant, or they do implant but fail in the first trimester, second one, or all the way up to stillbirths, right? So you've got this whole period of time here, and a whole load of different reasons why a fertilized egg might not survive. And it turns out that of all eggs that fertilize, somewhere between 2/3 and 3/4 don't survive. Now, God has designed that to be the case. God knows it's going to be the case, and God creates that to be the case anyway. And if you believe that abortion is murder, this is natural abortion that God has designed and created. Therefore, God is murdering, if you believe that these are ensouled human beings, billions of human beings over time, millions every year. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I get it. I mean, and that's just the one. You're just dealing with abortion, like name it. People who are dying of whatever, right?
Malaria, any disease,
anything that's just bad. Wow.
But this is great because it has that motive purchase for theists who are so pro-life. Pro-life. They're not. They're pro-birth. And after those babies are born, they just like don't care about welfare generally, and etc. But this goes right to the heart of their the only argument I ever really see back to this is one that I have a real problem with, which is God has a right to do that.
Yeah, that's the Apostle Paul argument when he's like, "Who do you think you are, oh man?" To answer back to the Maker. Does the thing made say to its maker, "Why have you made me thus?" No, shut your mouth, stay in your lane. That's pretty much what Paul's saying. Like he doesn't give like this special modern day apologetic to try and get around it. He just faces it head on. Your creation, he's creator in Paul's head. Like who do you think you are? Like a slave would to a master. Shut your mouth and God can do whatever he wants and blame them because you're his creation. That's kind of Paul's mindset. And that's kind of, I know it's like something that you would go, really?
I just don't agree. I just don't agree with that.
I get it.
So, and we'll come on to why in a second, and I'll bring an analogy in a second. But to go back to, actually, no, you carry on saying what you're going to say.
Well, I was just going to get a super chat or two if you cool.
Yeah.
While you look, Avros is back, man. Thank you so much. I really do appreciate all the support you've been giving me tonight. Thank you. I really do appreciate that. Based on cosmological argument, God cannot have knowledge of an actual infinite, and knowledge of future is actual infinite. So God's omniscience cannot reduce the great making property of God.
Right. This gets into, there's been loads of stuff online, actually, on YouTube. Phil Halper, who I've interviewed myself, known as Skydive Phil for his videos, has done a load of videos on the Kalam, and talking to William Lane Craig is a big fan of the Kalam, and one of his arguments against it uses Hilbert's Hotel, which is to do with actual infinities and infinite sets. And he says that this is logically incompatible, and he's logically incoherent or contradictory. Which he says to his common audience, but then when he speaks to actual sort of mathematicians and philosophers, he says, "Oh no, it's metaphysically, impossible." It's like, no, but you said over there to these people who don't really know what you're talking about, it's logically impossible. So what is it, Craig? But anyway, so he basically bastardizes maths a little bit, and that's, infinities are weird, right? And what Averroes is saying there might be right, but might also not be right, because it really depends on how you deal with infinities. And it all gets a bit mind-boggling, but I think there's loads of interesting arguments to do with God in that context. To do with before you create time, so you are in God world. Go back to that God world I talked about earlier, causally prior to creating the universe. If you haven't created space-time, there's no time. So there is no. But what we understand as causality requires time. So, causality, time is almost a measurement of change in some sense. So, without time, you can't have causality, you can't have change, and therefore God literally can't create. there would just be timelessness. So there's loads of weird arguments, but again, that's getting into a whole Kalam cosmological.
Well,
argument.
he has another one. Thank you for that super chat as well, my friend. No possible change is possible if God allowed no evil to exist. I successfully argued against problem of evil even when I was a strong atheist.
Okay, I would need to unpick that a little bit. So I won't speak to that at the moment because that looks quite interesting. No possible change is possible if God allowed no evil to exist. I would need to think about that. So thank you.
Should I screenshot it and like send it to you for later?
Yeah, yeah. Or he might need to, because I might need to understand the wording there. No possible change is possible. So I don't know how that works, but
I'll just send it to you. And in case we don't cover it during these recordings, we can always like cover it up. And I'm friends with them on Facebook too. So I could just message him. We do have a few more. Did you want to get them real quick?
Yeah, yeah. Go.
Avros, clarification on second to last comment. Open theism, not God's omniscience, does not refute divine great making property.
Well, it depends what you define as a great making property, and that is itself subjective. So if you're saying that divine foreknowledge of future is not a great making property, there are some people that would disagree with that, and I would. I don't believe in God, so I think great making property. It depends what you're starting with. But I would say if I was a theist and I was arguing that God would have to have all the great making properties to the maximal amount, then I would certainly say that God would have to have divine foreknowledge, because I think that I can imagine a being that's greater than that has more knowledge. To me, and that I would disagree with what Avros is saying there.
Thank you. William Arons, thank you for the super chat. It seems to me that a God that exists based on the reality of the universe shown by space telescope is a place of continuous Genesis creation and apocalypse destruction, a God for more than Earth.
Well, so this is where you start talking about things like these are the design arguments, the teleological arguments. Say, well, actually, is this universe designed for life? It's like the Goldilocks idea of like, and this is just right. The constants are just right for life. And you're like, if it was just right for life, there would be loads of life everywhere. But there isn't. There's life just in these very small amounts of places. And then there are black holes, which seem to be pretty well designed for death. And in fact, this universe looks better designed for death than it does for life. I mean, I can die really easily. Do you know what? I could lick that plug socket now and kill myself, right? So, do you know what I mean? Like, why? And I could go and get. There's so many ways I can die. There's just ridiculous.
Lick. What made you think to say that, man?
Just trying to think of the quickest. I've always wanted to lick that plug socket, but it's too dangerous. But
oh man,
do you know what I mean? So this universe appears to be like the idea that it's fine-tuned for life. I would argue actually it's fine-tuned for death. Right. It's a far you can get. There's far more ways we can die than we can live, I think.
Well, yeah, and the chances of dying are inevitable, right? And chances of people coming to live, if you look at it that way, another way, it's not everybody comes to be a person who lives. Crawford Fulton King, thank you for this. If it was a perfect world, then addiction wouldn't exist, or MS, or the conflict in Ukraine, Syria, etc.
Brilliant point, because he's gone for MS because I've got multiple sclerosis and you're a former addict or present. I don't know how you define that. You're still an addict.
Whatever you want to call me. It's been like almost 7 years, but yeah.
But yeah, absolutely right. And we'll come on to talk about that when we talk about heaven in about 7 hours time. So that's a really good point. That you can imagine a perfect world. And you could imagine God just creating us in that perfect world, which would be heaven. So why doesn't he do that? Why did we have to go through all this? But we will come on to that in a more.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
What I wanted to say about the abortion thing, or indeed the tsunami thing, which is the difference between omissive will or permissive will and active will. So you have this thing that God, there's a tsunami takes place or abortions take place, and God doesn't step in to stop them. And I want to just say that omissive will or permissive will is exactly the same as active will. Here's the analogy. So if I'm a really big hulking guy, right, and I'm walking down the road and there's this little lad that's beating up a granny, a fragile old granny, right, And I walk up to this little lad, and I could easily just lift him up and throw him away and stop him doing that morally horrible thing. But I go, no, I'm not going to get involved. I'm just going to let that happen. Although he is like morally responsible for beating that granny up, I have culpability for not stepping in where I possibly could and stopping evil where I possibly could. Mm-hmm. Right. So I would have some kind of culpability. It gets even worse when I've actually designed the entire universe and everything about that whole scenario taking place. So it's actually far worse than this. But just in a very simplistic sense, if I don't stop evil when I could very easily stop it, I have some culpability for not stopping it. So this is where, the tsunami, why does one less person not die? When I stub my toe in the morning, when there's this spontaneous abortion. And of course, this then gets back to having to think up reasons why God would allow this. So if I'm there standing by watching this happen, there has to be a reason why I'm letting that happen that overcomes the reasons for not stepping in and
right.
stopping it.
This is the same problem I had with when Calvinists are like, I'm getting into theology here, but on predestination, they'll go, well, God doesn't actively cause people to do evil. And I went ahead and accepted that, yes, he did. And they wanted to say it's passive. Well, what he does when he wants people to do evil, in their view, is literally this argument I heard Peter Singer, the philosopher that I've interviewed before, try to make. And he's like, all right, they did a test in some college scenario. You probably know this better than me, but I'll bring it up. Maybe you know the rest of the story. There's a train incident coming up, and there's 5 people on the tracks. If you pull the lever or press a button or say something, I can't remember, something very like almost passive, it causes the train to go into the second track and kill 1 person instead of 5. So you have a choice. Let it run and don't do anything. It kills 5 people. Okay. Or say something and it causes it to go off to the side and it kills 1 or something like that. And 80% people.
So the trolley experiment where if you pull the lever, it saves the 5 but kills the 1. And it turns out that about 89% of people will pull the lever.
Right. And then the other side is like pushing a man off of a ledge to save. And it's like 20% or something, or 19% said that was the right thing to do. And like 81% or whatever it was like, hell no, that's
essentially
wrong.
The percentages get reversed. And what this tells you is that when we are thinking purely rationally, we do one thing, but when psychology is involved, actually different things happen. And there's a really, really good, I could find it and send it to you, but on YouTube, there's an absolutely brilliant experiment they did, and they did a live version of this, and they had to go through loads of ethics, panels to make sure that this was all right, and it was very carefully managed. But basically, they set up this railway, control place where they got these people that were thought they were coming to do like a day's agency work or whatever. Mm-hmm. They're sitting in there and they were being shown by the guy that was working there, saying, oh, here's all the video of all the trains. See that train there? There's some people working on a track over there. This is, if we need to stop the train really quickly, we just had to press this button here and that stops the train. But it will send it onto that track. So you can see there's a guy working over there. I mean, so if you press that, it would go onto that track. And anyway, so they set it up really carefully. And then the guy says, I've just got to go and take this phone call. Hang on, I'll be back in a couple of minutes. And they leave this person in there who's watching all the screens and sees a train coming towards and knows that train is going to kill the 5 people. And so they literally have to make the decision whether they were in real life. Of course, this is all simulated. They don't know that this is very cleverly videoed and everything, so it won't happen. But what was interesting about the people that did it is the amount of people that had moral paralysis. So the amount of people that just froze and weren't able to actually make a decision at all, because one of the theories is that actually you always expect someone to come in and make that decision for you. Like when we come up to really difficult decisions, people like come and save the day, and no one does, and it's like 5 people end up dying because you can't do anything and you don't know whether to push it or not. Anyway, it's really
I just found it was interesting, passive and active, as in like, would it matter if God lifted his grace off of a person who's going to be an axe murderer and kill 5 grannies in the woods? Or is he actively involved? Either way, he's culpable for the situation happening in the Calvinist worldview. But Calvinists want to say, no. He just lifts his grace, and now he's a wild animal who can't control himself because he's so evil that he goes and does this. Dude, it's like letting my pit bull that I know has rabies that if I don't keep the vaccine that keeps his rabies from getting out of control, I don't vaccinate him this time, and I let him out. And he goes off and does crazy stuff. It's just insane. I'm just pointing out.
So another sidebar onto that is that explains why we could drop a bomb on Hiroshima just by pressing the button. But if you were to walk around and shoot 100,000 people in the head, you would be unable to do that. So we can press a button, we can pull a lever and make these moral decisions by kind of justifying it by just pushing a lever. But when we're actually face to face with doing these moral decisions in a very personal, psychological sense, they're much more difficult to do. Next chapter, God is morally culpable for our sins and atonement is incoherent. So this is a chapter, and some of your viewers would have seen this before because I use this a few times. I've used this a few times, and I have said this to you before when we did our atonement one for the resurrection. So this is the idea that God has all the omni characteristics. And therefore is morally culpable for all of our sin. Absolutely. So let's analogize this. Right, you are an amazing scientist and you are working in your lab and you create sentient life forms out of nothing in your lab. You know how to do it, right? But before you create them, you know 100%, you know infallibly that these sentient life forms that you're going to create will go out into the world outside your lab. And most of them will rape and pillage and murder and do horrible things. Some of them will do nice things, you know, give to charity and paint some nice artwork and be lovely. But most of them will go out and do horrible things. Right. You know 100% what will happen. You create these sentient life forms out of nothing in your lab, and they go out and freely do that themselves. Right. Now, the police get involved and they go, where are all these people coming from, these sentient life forms going on doing all these horrible things? They find out that you created them, but you knew that they were going to do that, and you designed them in such a way that they would do that, right? So you are the ultimate designer and creator of those sentient beings. The police, I would argue, would have full right to come knocking on your lab door and say, you are morally culpable, at least in some part, for what those things have done. Because if you hadn't done that, they wouldn't have done that. And you knew they were going to do that. And you designed them in such a way that they did that.
Well, yeah, obviously. You know, what's funny, to give you an actual real life example, legal situation. My brother got attacked by a Rottweiler when we lived in Puerto Rico. And this Rottweiler was not supposed to be on the military base. Now, the man didn't train it to become a flesh-eating monster, but it got loose one day when my little brother, he's like 7 or 8 years old, and it got a hold of his ankle, took a chunk of the meat out of his ankle, like to the point where they thought he was going to have nerve damage and all of that. They ended up having to put the dog to sleep, but also they charged the state. My family didn't charge him. My dad worked with him. The guy was in the same unit as my father in the special forces, but the area we were at on the base charged them for their dog doing that. If they weren't responsible, they didn't create the dog. They didn't know the dog was going to do this, and they're still responsible. How much more when you start talking about a deity? Okay.
Yeah. So that's it. When you have created it and you know it will do that, and you've created it in such a way that it does that.
That's why that's why I look back. I'm taking this personal here for a moment, and this is a little TMI, but the whole lust and sexual stuff that we humans go through naturally. Like, I used to beat myself every day about how I would look and see a woman, or I'd lust and things like this. And it really, really, really caused me some trauma in my thinking and how in my mind, I'm like, what is wrong with me? Do I have God's spirit? Like, I felt like this war with myself for many, many years, going down and being embarrassed, telling people to pray over me, and they're looking at me like, I felt like no one else was doing this. No one else had a problem looking at pornography. No one else had these issues that I had. And I'm walking down here being honest with my Bible, getting prayed over, looking like I felt so embarrassed for many years because I was trying to be honest. I'd go down almost every other day to some of these youth group things and to the church to have them pray over me. And they'd be talking about unclean spirits, this and this and that. And come to find out, it's all normal. It's all part of nature, and that's really
another example of why how you have to explain everything with an OmniGod. Right. And I did a video the other day on the argument from phobias, I've got one phobia called trypophobia, and when I see holes in clusters of holes and regular stuff like that. It's already making my brain go fizzy at the moment. No, it's cool. It's really weird. It's horrible, basically. But the point is that under atheism, I can explain that through evolution, because actually it's going to trigger things to do with disease, and it looks like clusters of disease cells and stuff and all this kind of thing.
You're getting all like.
But you know, so that's actually a safety mechanism that's gone a bit haywire, and etc. etc. But the theist has to go, how do I explain phobias? So why would God create humans that would be fundamentally afraid or disgusted or have really uncomfortable sensations with a whole load of stuff, right? A whole load of phobias, right? Again, this is an abductive argument. So it's like, well, I can explain it under atheism. What better explains phobias? Atheism or theism? Theism, you have to jump through hoops to go, well, why would God create humans such that they had phobias that gave them torment in their lives? Like, why would you do that? What is that, a superfluity of love? Like, is your love overflowing so much that you would create humans to have OCD? To like, you know, what's going on? And again, it's just another argument that but going back to the moral culpability of God in design, another example I often use is the designer and CEO of a car company, right? So Derek, you're a designer of a car and a CEO of a car company. You own the car company and you also design these vehicles. Now, before you create these vehicles, you design them knowing that 100% you know that they're going to veer off the road, crash, and certainly kill people, the people who are in that, or people that they crash into, right? And you're like, right, I know this is going to happen 100%. Okay, I'm going to design and create them anyway. So you go and sell all these cars,
and then I'm going to blame the car,
and then they go and crash and kill people, and then you go to the people who you've sold the car to, and you demand a payment for that. You say, well, first of all, let's talk about you designing and creating those cars to do that. Do you have moral culpability for what the cars did? I would argue you do.
Yeah.
And you would be sued in a court of law, rightly so, right? So God is morally culpable for designing and creating things that go wrong and are bad. So especially when we're entirely contingent beings, that we aren't involved in our own design process. And God knew that would happen in advance of us, of him creating.
You're really good, by the way, at like role playing as if this God exists. If some Christian, like a random fundamentalist popped on right now, this is the kind of stuff they would take to the bank. See, he admitted, if he admits God exists, he's just blaming God. It's like, no, I don't think you listened to how this whole entire thing developed. You're making the analogy if, and now you're making it make sense in comparison to a natural world where all we have are the properties that we look at, which we would consider there's no God. So yeah, that is a very interesting point. I do have a super chat though.
Can I just finish? So on that car point, it gets worse because atonement comes along. If you believe in any kind of theory of atonement, whether Christian or not, and you have this situation where the car goes off and crashes, and then God goes, oh, you know that car that crashed that I designed and created anyway? I want payment for that. I want payment for that happening. You know, God created humans that in such a way that we sinned, right? And then wants payment for our sin. So hang on, you're the one that created us like this. The idea, now there are lots of different theories of atonement. You can have moral example theory, which is slightly more, you know, I could maybe understand that slightly better. But some of these payment theories of atonement are just thoroughly problematic. That God would create, you know, broken vehicles that go and cause suffering, and then demand payment for that breakage is just a problem.
This has been a problem every time I try to wrap my head around that. Even when I wasn't a Calvinist, you know, when you get to Calvinism, you accept it and go, it's all part of a plan. But really, you don't know what that damn plan is. You just hope that it's good. So it's all this God of the gaps, and it's kind of the trusting God's got what's best in mind because he knows what's right. But then they go so far as to like, they want to paint us so evil and so wicked so that if bad happened, well, you deserved it anyway, you know, and they make up these horrible, like psychological ideas about us as humans. And you already believe that, even if you're not a Calvinist, in some form of, you know, evangelical Christianity. You're a wretch, you're broken, you're this, you're that. And anyway, yeah. I'm with you.
So and with Calvinism, you just got to hope. You fingers crossed that I'm one of the elect, which was decided before I even existed, right? So it's like there's nothing I can do about it. Yeah. It appears, it's just like I'm along for the ride, and I hope the ride's going to get me to heaven. But
yeah, and there's one funny thing that I hear all the time where people are like, "You were never one of us," right? Because there's the perseverance of the saints, their tulip theology. But in my mind, I'm like, you really don't know that, because what if I come back, right? And then you don't know that I wasn't one of you. Maybe I was one of you and you don't know. Like, I'm just throwing out like all sorts of nonsense to point out. Yeah. But Johnny Mac, thank you for the super chat. Perhaps Averroes was trying to say that if God crafted a world by his necessarily good nature, evil cannot exist because all actions derive from God.
So trying to say that
everything we call evil wouldn't be evil at that point. That's how I'm interpreting this.
Well, I would say yes. I mean, I agree with this. If God was omnibenevolent and created any world, I would say that any evil existing or any suffering existing just straight away invalidates God's omnibenevolence. Now, you might say there might be a reason, but I think, again, abduction, what does it better support? Does suffering better support an atheistic world or a theistic world? I think it better supports an atheistic world. Now, we again, this gets onto things, the heaven argument, one of the heaven arguments I was going to come on to later, which I keep promising, which is the idea that if God knows in advance who's going to pass the test or whatever it is that gets you into heaven, he knows in advance exactly. So say God creates 100 people, right? And 80 people are going to go to hell and 20 people are going to go to heaven. No matter what you believe about hell, whether it's an actual place or whether it's non-existence or whatever, 80 people don't get it, right? 20 people do get it and they go to heaven, right? What's the point of, if you know that in advance, what's the point of doing this whole test where the 80 people fail and 20 people pass if you know that's going to happen? And this involves loads of pain and suffering, this test scenario. Why not just take those 20 people and just put them in heaven straight away? And like, this was the end goal. The end goal is heaven. I know who's going to pass the test and go to heaven. So I'm not going to create this world where there's loads of suffering. I'm just going to take 20 people, create them in heaven, job done. And I can still be omnibenevolent. Because that's the superfluity of my love now makes sense, which is I've got so much love, it overflow, my cup overfloweth, right? And I create this heaven, which is just an eternal paradise. I know counterfactuals. I know all my counterfactuals, so I know who's going to get into heaven before I create the world. I'm not going to create the world anymore because it's full of pain and suffering and plate tectonics and people dying by the 240,000 load. And I'm just going to take the 20 people and I'm going to whack them in heaven and say, there you go, job done, eternity in heaven. How do you like me now? I'm pretty nice, aren't I?
Dude, you're rapid, man. That was pretty good. Pretty good. Avros is back. Thank you so much, my friend. I appreciate the support. And so he says theism is, I think, greater than religion. Okay. Like atheism is greater than communism or objectivism. If I can show materialism is metaphysically impossible, that leaves idealist monism as the logical possibility, excluding substance dualism.
Okay, so he's going down that rabbit hole of idealism. So I know those are unconnected in some sense. So that second part, if I can show that materialism is metaphysically impossible, that's what a lot of people are arguing about at the moment in philosophy, and have been for some time. But there's been this new kind of idealism, like Cashapp type of idealism, which is becoming quite popular at the moment. But yeah, he can do all that, but again, none of that really affects any of these arguments. So whether the ontology of this universe is materialistic or idealistic, the idealism is that we still feel like it's materialistic. Like if I punch myself in the head now, it's going to hurt, and I'm going to feel like it's material. Like even if at base it's idealistic. In other words, pain and suffering is still we still experience pain and suffering. It doesn't matter what the ontology of the world is. These arguments will still hold. They are not dependent on materialism or idealism. And the other point is theism is less than religion. Well, religion is just what humans do with theism. So yeah, I can see that. And atheism is less than, yes, in order to get to communism from atheism, you have to do a load more moral philosophy and politics, politics, I would argue, is moral philosophy. So yeah, there's a big journey there, and from theism to religion is a big journey involving anthropology, human psychology, etc., etc. So yes.
Thank you so much for that. Awesome. All right, I know I've been interrupting you a lot here. But,
no, mate. You are we are a reaction between what people are coming up with, and that's why you exist and we exist. This is the reason I exist, is to answer super chats. That's like
thank you for taking those two. And Dharma Defender, our feelings are mutual about girls. Thank you.
It's difficult to answer some of these because stuff like that last one, that's like a 2-hour discussion in and of itself. Well, it's like a 20-hour discussion.
I'm telling you, Avros, when he writes me, he knows he writes me, and it's heavy stuff. I mean, there's a lot in there, and I'm like, okay, these are like books that could be read. Like, there's a lot.
Him and my mate Rob Stroud from earlier should get together and have a chat about that.
Look, he got me one more. I was
goodness.
trying to say that evil is kind of entropy, or the potentiality of deterioration. If no such possibility exists, then there cannot be any change, because your guess definition of divine perfection exclude deterioration.
Okay, that's just going to take me a long time to sit down and think of that. I like the idea that evil is some kind of entropy, so it's some kind of disorder and depends on deterioration. But I'd have to again
screenshot
on the fly, screenshot and send it to me.
Screenshot,
and that's really sad. That Avaros, that's really. It's an apology, because that's really good money. Thank you for doing that. It's really supportive.
Yeah, no, seriously, thank you.
But I can't answer that right now.
I will get your answers. Yeah, and Dharma Defender Empiricism will win. Thank you for that super chat, my friend. Thank you so much.
So chapter 7 out of 30. We're an hour and 41 into this.
Did we actually? Yeah, we did. Okay, I didn't pop up 6. Okay.
Yeah. So 7 is, why don't we photosynthesize? I like this argument because, again, it's like looking at the world around us and saying, again, what does this world better support? Atheism or theism? So again, thinking about OmniGod. OmniGod is all loving, etc., etc., etc. And this is sort of connected to the Darwinian problem of evil, which is a really strong iteration, really strong version of the problem of evil. Why is there so much suffering in the world? You could say, why did God create suffering in the natural world? And carnivorousness. Let's look at carnivorousness. So it appears that a load of organisms their existence depends upon them devouring and getting their energy from other organisms, which involves them killing the other organisms and then therefore causing pain and suffering to the other organisms.
This is a problem we deal with today with veganism, or we're going to keep eating animals, right?
Yeah, exactly. So the natural world is full of carnivorousness. Okay, and the question is, does it need to be full of carnivorousness? So the theist has to then have to give an account for why carnivorousness exists, given that it doesn't need to exist conceptually. Like, I can imagine, like, for example, why don't we photosynthesize? We know that photosynthesis is a way of getting energy from the sun. God could have played around with the constants such that we could generate enough energy to live the existences that we need to live through photosynthesizing through our skin or whatever.
And we know that have bowel issues, having to go use the restroom and the whole nine, right?
Yeah. There would be no dirty nappies or diapers. That's a better world straight away. No meconium for early babies who, we just photosynthesize. So this to me is a great argument. It's a great example of the problem of evil being applied to the data around us. So why do we why doesn't God make us photosynthesize? So then you start thinking about, well, why do we need energy at all? In fact, when you look at most of the problems in this world, the problems rise because we are scrabbling over where to get energy from. Yeah. So if you look at what's going on in Ukraine and Russia, it's about
gas,
fossil fuels, hydrocarbons. It's about, when you're looking about arguing over whether to dam this river up here, which then the country that's had that access to that river for 5,000 years no longer has access to that river because the water's been dammed because that country wants it. And when we want this natural resource and that natural wind, it's all about sort of arguing with other and fighting with other organisms over natural resources and energy and etc., etc., etc. Well, why couldn't God just create humanity or organisms such that we didn't need energy to survive? Because you've got to remember, God could do perpetual miracles. So even if you said, well, God couldn't get the constants just right so that we could photosynthesize, it's like, well, I thought God was omnipotent and omniscient. So, but if he can't do that, then he could do perpetual miracles. So he could just like perpetually have miracles, breaking the laws of nature, such that every organism on Earth gets enough energy at the time that they need it to do whatever they want to do. So, but God doesn't do that. So therefore, we're left in this world where we have to, like, everything's a scrabble for energy until the heat death of the universe. You're like, well, I can understand, I can explain that in atheism, right? Because I don't need to think about the framework of being all loving, right? And or omni. But you, theist, you have to explain every bit of this data in terms of OmniGod. Why don't we photosynthesize? In fact, why do we have bodies at all? Why aren't we just disembodied minds? Like, if you want to talk idealism, then why didn't God just create us? And then it gets back to why didn't God just create us in heaven? Just create heaven with a bunch of incorporeal like minds just faffing around heaven, painting pictures and doing whatever they like for eternity.
That's why you keep coming back to which world makes the most sense, and it obviously is the one that you're advocating for. I want to get this one right here. Johnny Mac says, I'm studying vitamin C deficiency. We used to be able to photosynthesize vitamin C. Why would God have us lose this precious ability? No sense.
I love this stuff because you can look at any journal, any piece of scientific journal, and bear in mind there's probably 50 journals coming out a day. I don't know, maybe more than that, right. Around the world. All right, every single bit of research we find, it can be whatever bit of research. Here is vitamin C deficiency. Every bit of research we find is like, how do you explain that under God? Even stuff that seems morally neutral. Why would God want that to be the case? Because God has designed that to be the case. God knows that's going to be the case. That is the case. Why would God want that to be the case? In this case, why would God create a situation where we are not very good at producing vitamin C and we are becoming deficient at it?
Vitamin? Is it vitamin?
Obviously.
Oh, come on. It's vitamin. Come on, man.
So I wrote, as you know, I wrote this book in British English, right? But Dan Barker's forward in the book is just taking a piss out of me. He takes the piss out of me in this by taking a mickey out of all my anglicizations and saying that it should be American English. So
he repeats everything you said, but he gets it the right way, and it's hilarious. You got to read it real quick. Holy Humanist Nuria, sorry, is it Nuria? I always try to get your name right. She has a YouTube channel, by the way. Everybody needs to go check it out because she's an ex-Muslim, and she's kind of digging into the dark past, if you will, and finding out the problems, everything from the Hadith to the Quran, you name it. And thank you so much for the super chat. Seriously, go support her. Eventually, I'm going to have her back on here as well, these arguments and going up against a pretty harmful ideology. 30 plus arguments to quash or squash believing in some absolute BS. Excuse my French. Keep smashing it, Derek. Love this dissection with Jonathan. Brilliant stuff.
Thank you. That's really kind, Nuria. Very kind. Appreciate that.
Thank you so much.
So the next argument is chapter 8. God has no free will. So this is the argument that that comes out of God having divine foreknowledge of future events, right? So, and you might talk about great making properties, and this is one of the arguments that humans have free will. So free will is often given as a theodicy, an explanation of why there's so much evil and suffering, because the idea is that there's free will or there's suffering because we have free will. Free will is really important. We don't want to be like automata, that God, like robots, just creates these robots just doing whatever. So we have free will. But the corollary of having free will is the fact that we can make bad decisions. So therefore, that's what explains why there is evil and suffering, because humans make crappy decisions. Okay. And there's some interesting arguments here that you could talk about whether, well, it's not logically impossible that we could actually freely choose to make the right decisions all the time. So if God knew all the counterfactuals, he could create a particular world where everyone just so happened to choose the right things all the time. It's not logically impossible that we always choose wrong. It's just, human nature that we do, but it's not logically impossible. So, and this is an argument that William Lane Craig had with Ray Bradley when they talked about heaven and hell, and Ray Bradley actually won the debate against William Lane Craig. One of the few that Craig has lost. Shelley Kagan's another one, but Ray Bradley had him on this. Anyway, so the idea is that I've just lost my train of thought. Oh yeah, so free will is this great making property. So the idea, theists believe that God must have free will, but the thing is, God cannot have free will. It literally cannot. It's conceptually impossible for him to have free will.
Keeping in mind, for those who are popping on, the OmniGod, so that anyone who's, I want to make sure that new people are popping in are like, oh, what? The God he's talking about, all-knowing, all-powerful, the whole nine, is not. It can't happen.
So God knows all future events of humans and contingent entities, right? But also God has divine foreknowledge of himself, right? Or itself. So this is to say, if God knows he's going to make a cup of tea on Tuesday morning at 9:15 on Tuesday morning, right? Then when it comes to 9:15 on Tuesday morning, God has to make a cup of tea, because if God doesn't make a cup of tea, then his foreknowledge back here is infallible. But God cannot have infallible foreknowledge. He has to have perfect he cannot have fallible foreknowledge. Right. He has to have infallible foreknowledge. So back here, his foreknowledge has to be spot on, which means when we get to 9:15 on a Tuesday morning, he has to make a cup of tea. In other words, God has a full prediction of his own behavior going forward, because he has full divine foreknowledge, and that includes of himself. So if God knows everything he's going to do from now until the end of time or eternally, then God cannot veer off that path, which means that God cannot choose to be contrary to his own predictive knowledge. Yeah?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
No, yeah. So, I mean, I've thought about this as a 5-6-year-old walking down the road. I was raised in a Christian household, and I'd skip to the left and I'd go, God knows what I'm going to do before I do it. And I try to skip to the right, but then skip back to the left and go, I'm going to try and break. Can I do something God can't know that I'm going to do? And I try to and realize I'm stuck. I can't do anything. He'll know that I'm going to trick him to try and trick him about the trick. And there's nothing I could do. But your point is well taken. If God can't do that, there's just no way.
Yeah.
And
So God cannot have any sensible understanding of libertarian free will. He cannot choose to do that which he didn't already know he was going to do. So it's really difficult to say he freely chose to do that. If he had predicted, he's like on a train track that he cannot deviate from, and that until the end of existence.
That's why I said the whole foreknowledge thing. It can't add up in my brain. It doesn't add up, because to me, if you were this all-knowing before anything ever happened, it just is. It always will be, kind of thing. And I just can't see how, when it gets to that point, there's a lot here. Couple super chats. Where are we at? What chapter are we at, real quick? We're at 7.
Chapter 8.
Okay, so we're on God has no free will. So let's do 2 more and wrap it up. Then we have 20 more arguments. So we'll do 2 more. But first, let's get Dharma Defender. Why did God create a situation where most people are dependent on staple crops that are unhealthy and are just enough to keep you alive, otherwise starve? Why not provide people with their proper need?
Why did God create a situation where most people are dependent on staple crops that are unhealthy and are just enough to keep you alive, otherwise starve? Why not provide people with the proper need? Yes, exactly. Well, yeah, quite.
Well, there's a lot of people who do starve, but
this is again this goes back to any data that you see has to be explicable in terms of OmniGod. So, in terms of evolution, we get by, right? We get by as well as we can with the tools that we got. And that's really how the mechanism of evolution operates. But yeah, so you know, you could imagine a situation where God could have created a universe whereby the crops that we eat require less nutrients or fewer nutrients to make the same amount of energy, or create more energy, you know, that they do presently, so that we need to eat less of them, etc., etc., etc. We can imagine ways in which this universe could be much better, but it's not. And so therefore, how do you explain that?
I got an email from a man in Afghanistan, I think it was 2-3 years ago, and he was asking for advice with addiction, because, you know, I came out of that, was struggling with heroin. And he said, you know, I need advice. You made it. How can I do it? Let me tell you my situation. And he went on to explain to me that it's very difficult to eat food there. It's so expensive for the food, but it's so cheap for the heroin, and he's already addicted. So he said, how? I don't have money. I'm poor. I beg to get the next hit, you know, for the heroin. But I can't afford food unless someone brings it to me. And he's like, what do I do? And I'm in my head, you know, I'm in America. I'm kind of in a good spot where I can move out, go to a hotel somewhere, stay with a friend, whatever. He has nothing. And I think about that suffering for a moment in light of this point about food. Like, it is harder for him to eat where he lives in Afghanistan than it is for him to get a hit of heroin, which hijacks everything. I mean, I can't even get in the horrors of what that's like.
So these go back to these sort of abductive arguments and inference to the best explanation. So given that scenario, does that look more like the sort of world that an OmniGod would create, or does it look more like an atheistic world?
No, I get it.
You know, if you've got someone that it's almost impossible to get out of their vicious cycle of issue and suffering, then that doesn't look like a superfluity of love to me.
Right.
It just is not. And it's like, I don't want to have to constantly jump through hoops to take the most improbable explanation of data. You know, it's this appeal to, well, there might be a reason why God could do that. Yeah, that's just not good enough. You know, if I often analogize it like this, right? So if I had a kid, one of my children, I've got twins, right? Imagine one of them's like 3 years old, and they stamp on some flowers in the flower bed, right? And as a responsible parent, what I would do is take my child aside, say, right, that's bad what you did there. This is why it's bad. I'm going to punish you or correct your behavior in this kind of way so that you won't do that again. And there's some kind of, and we have this relationship whereby you know very clearly that what you did was bad, and you know why it's bad and what will happen if you do it again. Now, take this scenario, which I think represents the God scenario better, which is my child does that, stamps on the flower bed and destroys all these flowers. I take my child home, I beat them for a month with a stick, I then give them cancer for 10 years, and then they die, right? And at no point during that whole process do I say why I'm beating them and why I've given them cancer, and there's no kind of connecting of the behavior explicitly to the punishment and to you know, the scenario. So that's how I see it, which is like stuff like that of that person in Afghanistan is going through this cycle of suffering.
I honestly didn't have good advice. I did not know how to answer his question. It was so, I can't tell you how dark it was. It was just like I couldn't answer it. So I just tried to encourage them to try. Yeah, that's all I could do.
It doesn't matter what God you believe in. God, why is this? Like, I am being punished here. I'm being beaten for a month. I'm being given cancer. I'm being, you know, but you're not telling me what I've done wrong here and helping me to get out of this scenario where of physical addiction here, where it's easier to live in that. And I have, you know, physical addictions that are keeping me in this, you know, why do you created this scenario for me? It's
Yeah, we got a few more. Avros, Platonic salvation is trans-temporal process. Meta metempsychosis over eons of existence, and this requires an evolutionary model of existence. AI suggests that best programming allows a system to evolve and learn from mistakes.
Yes, I don't know where that point is going. So salvation. I mean, I don't. Again, what would be the reason of creating a whole bunch of entities that some of them get salvation, some of them don't? You don't really know how you get salvation. It may be a process that takes place over into eternal existence in heaven, and it's just this lack of clarity. And then you throw divine hiddenness into that, and yeah, I mean, you can create some kind of scenario whereby you can account for pain and suffering in terms of some trans-temporal process going towards some kind of salvation. But again, God, if you're not communicating that really, really, really clearly to me, then it just looks like you're being a bastard. And yeah, I don't know. There's so much in there that I wouldn't know how to unpick that concisely. Right. Again, screenshot,
Avros, man, you get the screenshots of the night. So I'll send these to Jonathan. He can mull them over when he has time. And then we either address them on an upcoming episode, or we can have you write him back, whatever. Yeah. Alan Bird, the Omnishambles God. Thank you for the support.
That's a reference to Omnishambles, which was a political statement in the UK politics that happened several years back.
Wow.
George Osborne. It was an Omnishambles. I think the budget was called an Omnishambles. So, but yeah, so I like that. It has relevance. Yeah. Yeah,
thank you, Alan. Appreciate the support. Dennis R. Lecker, great to see you here, my friend. I agree with Jung, Einstein, and Peterson, who believe in the great whatever it is, Spinoza's God. Keep up the great work, Derek. Thank you for the support, man. Thank you.
Which is a kind of, and I wouldn't say Einstein believed in that God. I think that's incorrect. I think there's a lot of writing that's been done on what Einstein believed in, and he used God in a really loose sense, if at all, in a kind of as a synonym for like the natural laws. So he wasn't even a deist, I would argue. But Peterson, I would argue, probably believes something personally, but he has a base that he needs to appease. So he kind of gives this wishy-washy version of God that allows his Christian base or his theistic base to still like buy his books and stuff. He's a little bit dodgy. Jung is different again. So yeah, again, but that shows you all the different like iterations of God that you can possibly think of. Or there's so many different versions.
Thank you, Dennis. Appreciate that, man. Jonathan Hara, thank you for that super chat. What about the theist argument that it's all a test? Yahweh doesn't want all you faithless. That can't take a little suffering. We know old Yahweh is hyper ego, so treasure from heaven is only for few.
Okay, I've got, so chapter 11 is unfair levels of evidence, and we talked about this before, actually, Derek, because I think it's the idea that, and I did mention this earlier, which is if God knows in advance who's going to pass the test and who's going to fail it. So okay, let's do it now, right, Jonathan? Let's do it. So I'll try and be quick.
Are we doing it right now?
Yeah, I'll try and be quick.
Oh, right, so we're skipping to 11.
Yeah, sort of. So,
okay.
So the reason why, as a teacher, the reason why you give your pupils a test is because as a teacher, you don't know how much they know. So the test is for you as a teacher, and not so much the pupils don't get anything out of the test. It's just like, I need to know how much you know.
Right.
Now, if God is testing humanity, but God already knows everything, God doesn't need to test humanity. There's nothing that God gets out of testing them because he already knows. He doesn't need to test them. And so therefore, the whole argument that it's all a test is kind of, it goes back to, if God knows that 20 people are going to pass the test out of 100 and they get to heaven because they pass the test, just create them in heaven. Because if you're creating so that 80% of people go to hell or non-existence or whatever, you are creating all this suffering on earth, already knowing that 80 people are going to fail. And there's no point in doing that because you're not looking omnibenevolent. So actually, I'm not going to go fully into chapter 11 because we can leave that for the next one. But actually, this is partly into chapter 11, which is saying that the whole idea that if you've got full divine foreknowledge, tests are pointless unless the test is intrinsically valuable to the people taking the test, right? So if in me doing the test is somehow giving me something extra, but then it gets really problematic because it looks like in doing the test, I am necessarily getting involved in evil and suffering. So, and if God knows that in advance, God is just creating stuff such that it becomes evil and does and creates suffering. So it's all really, really problematic. So I think the test hypothesis, it makes no sense. We get back to why would God create at all? Why would God create? So yeah, well done for passing that test. I knew you were going to pass it. And well done for failing that test. I knew you were going to fail it. Oh, and by the way, I'm going to commit you to eternal damnation in hell and torture for eternity for failing the test that I knew you were going to fail and created you anyway in such a way that you would fail. Yay me.
There's so much there. Matthew Simpson, love all you do, MythVision. Jonathan, loved your Christmas birth narrative video. The Greek misunderstanding of Persian religions was fascinating.
Yeah, so thank you. I've done a few of them, and we did one with Aaron Adair, myself and you, Derek. And so if you haven't seen that on the Nativity of Critical Examination, check it out. And obviously buy the book. You don't have to read it, but you do need to buy at least 20 copies. So
at least, I mean, this is a test, by the way, in case you're wondering. Avaros is back. He says, Derek, I declare my platonic love for you, brother. Love you too, man. Thank you. Nice. I really do appreciate your friendship, and thank you for the support tonight, of course. And so, we are getting close to the end here. So
yeah. So actually, the next chapter leaves us at the end of part 1. So that's a good place to.
We're at 9, right?
Which is chapter 9, which is God and this world are immutable, which follows on directly from the previous chapter.
Okay.
So the previous chapter was God doesn't have free will. So this idea that God is on this train tracks, right? Because he knows all future events and he knows what his own behavior is going to be, all the actions that he does. Therefore, God cannot change. God really is immutable. This idea that you see in some of the holy books that God is immutable. Yes, God has to be immutable. God cannot change. There is no way that God can change because God knows exactly infallibly what he is going to do and be like in the future. The same applies to the world. There's no sense in the world can change from being what it's going to be. And I'll talk about this later in terms of prayer. Like God knows each instance of each subsequent instance of the world, knows what will happen, knows everything that will happen in that world. There's no way the world. So instead of God making a cup of tea at 9:15 on Tuesday morning, Derek, if you make a cup of tea at 9:15 on Tuesday morning, you can't not make that cup of tea if God knows that you're going to do that. And again, this is the whole divine foreknowledge, free will. Can you have it? And theists try to get around this with things like middle knowledge, but again, it doesn't get around it because you have things like the grounding objection. Or there's loads of rabbit holes here. But I really do think the biggest theological problem is divine foreknowledge. I think out of divine foreknowledge come so many problems.
Right.
If I was a Christian or theist, I think I would really want to ditch divine foreknowledge. But the problem is, if you ditch divine foreknowledge, everything just looks a bit random. It's like suddenly God is just creating and not really knowing what's going to happen. It's just like roll
these
the dice.
Promises he's got to try. He's got to work hard to try to make them happen. Because he's not sure and guaranteeing that they will. I mean, I guess that would be one way to look at it.
And he still has to be omnibenevolent. So he's like fighting fires with like love. He's like, oh, hang on, like I didn't know that was going to happen because I'm not omniscient of future events. And oh crap, that's really bad. I'm going to stop that. Oh, hang on, so if he was all loving, he would like step in and stop, but he doesn't seem to step in and stop. So it's all just a big hot mess.
Just so Lauren knows. The beginning actually addresses this. The whole conversation today, for those who are just tuning in, is about the OmniGod. So like you can picture a God without being all powerful, or picture a God that doesn't know the future, or picture a God that's not all loving. In the book that we're talking about, his 30 arguments against the existence of God are dealing with this the common Christian idea of God that we hear. And so that's pretty much the thing. So he's not establishing any of these. He's just pointing out, for the argument's sake,
if you're going to start with these, and some people might say that these are the ultimate great making properties. So you say, if you're going to have God as the greatest being in conception, as the ontological argument would state, then he's going to have, like, if you can imagine God with this amount of knowledge, you can imagine God with that much more knowledge, right? Well, if that's greater than that, then God would have that. And then so it just gets more and more and more until God has maximal knowledge, maximal love, maximal, all these great making properties. He has the perfect amount of, or maximal amount of, or infinite amount of, or, and then, and there are lots of arguments you can have about this, and you can get into the tangled weeds and undergrowth of arguing about the omni properties themselves. But as you said, we're just assuming omni. And then if that's what you believe, you've got problems here, and here.
Got it. Did you want to, Dennis R. Lecker, real quick, Einstein to Rabbi Herbert S. Goldstein, I believe in Spinoza's God, who reveals himself in the lawful harmony of the world. Thank you. So thank you for the super chat. I wonder, maybe he has a natural, I don't know, is Spinoza's God kind of a natural, like, almost saying the natural laws are God?
Yeah, so that's why I was saying that Einstein was very much his idea of God. It was synonymous with natural laws, which is exactly what Dennis is saying there. And this is where you get into. I mean, he famously written letters about God and stuff that kind of debunk these ideas that some Christians will say that, oh, Einstein believed in God.
Theist,
he's a theist. It's like, well, really, actually, if you read carefully what he said, he wasn't. But it's again, it's definitions, isn't it? Philosophy definitions.
Love you, Dennis. Thanks for that, man. All right, where are we at?
So we are at the end of section 1, and God and this world are immutable, and there's nothing you can do about it. And again, and we'll bring this into play later when we get on to talk about prayer and whether you can actually change anything by praying to God. And it turns out you can't. So there's no point in praying to God to get stuff done, because it's not like, I mean, we'll throw this in for free today, but this is like, you pray to God, you're like, oh God, old Doris has got cancer. Can you ungive her cancer, please? And it's not like God hears a prayer. He goes, oh, Derek, yeah, I hadn't thought about that. Oh, I really like Doris. It turns out that's a bad idea. You're right, Derek. I'm going to change my mind, and Doris is not going to have cancer anymore. It's like, so, but God would. So God can't have that experience, because God already knows the full foreknowledge, all future events. So he can't change his mind and ungive Doris cancer. And so therefore praying to that kind of intercessory prayer, that petitionary prayer, it just makes no sense, because God can't change that which he already knows is going to take place.
The reason I giggled is you reminded me in this prayer thing. I saw a meme recently, and it's got some foul language in it, but I thought it was really funny. This guy's all this muscle, he's just a human, but he's sitting there holding this rock up that's like falling on them. And I guess it's his wife and his kid or something. And they're both on the ground praying. And he's like, what the are you doing? Help, like I'm trying to keep this thing from crushing us. And she's over here like this, and the little kid's over here like this. And this guy's like face is saying it all. Like, what are you doing? Help me. Let's do this.
Do you know what? So and again, I've mentioned it already, but the whole Ukraine war, it's like, and thoughts and prayers, you get like a gun massacre in a school in America. Oh, thoughts and prayers. No, it's not thoughts and prayers. It's changing policy. It's not thoughts and prayers. It's getting off your ass and making a change, right? So what can I do to make the Ukraine thing better? As some random bloke, well, can I give money at least to some humanitarian charities, or even directly to like the Ukrainian government? Yes, I can. Okay, so that's what. The prayers aren't going to do jack. So don't give me your prayers, because that's just virtue signaling BS, and it has no causal efficacy at all.
Thank you, Jonathan. Look, Avaros, man, I'll tell you what, I might as well screenshot it right now. I'm just kidding. God cannot be immutable if time is real, he said. That is, at the very least, if presentism, B theory, is false, and it is, then it follows that merely turning of potential into actual events necessitates change in God's knowledge.
Oh, my goodness. This is not like... Yeah, so this is like A theory and B theory, presentism. The idea that you got past is a fact, present is a fact, future is a potential. Or do you think that past, present, and future are all fact, and we live in some kind of block universe of space time, where a 4-dimensional block universe, in which kind of fits with special relativity, but then with that you don't have free will because actually you're just kind of like so. Yeah, is yeah. So time, it depends on what your interpretation of time is and how well that fits in with known physics.
I just screenshot it. I'm going to send
it
to you anyway. Maybe you got a book in particular you'd want him to read. Maybe I can have a conversation with you and Avarice one day.
I've got other things to do for the next month, Derek.
I know, but we could plan it, man. We can plan it. Avarice, thank you for the support, my brother. Really do appreciate it tonight. We're coming up to the end, and it seems that, Brandon, you missed out, man. Is this an atheist channel? Actually, we're both monks in a monastery, and we're trying to convince everybody that they're guilty, born, wicked wretches who need to be saved from an all-loving God. God wants us to be saved, but a lot of people are just going to be burned by him for all eternity. And so, we're trying to reconcile. We're figuring that out as theists today. We're trying to figure out how...
I think there's some interesting conversation is as to what one is and how one labels oneself. So I would say technically I'm an agnostic atheist, which means to say there's only one thing I can know that's indubitably true, and that is that I as a thinking entity exist. I don't know what I is. I don't believe in a continuous I. I think my I changes from moment to moment to moment. So I'm a very different I than I was 20 years ago, 50 years ago, as a, oh no, not even 50, as a blastocyst or whatever. So, but right now as a thinking entity, I exist. Right, that's the only thing I can know indubitably, because by being able to doubt my existence, I have to necessarily exist. Right. Okay, so I exist. That's all I know indubitably. Everything else is a probability, and there's a non-zero chance that it's not true. So I could be living in the Matrix. I could be a brain in a vat. I could be living in some idealistic universe or whatever. So I don't know 100% that I'm not, or that I am. So therefore, in a sense, there's always an element of I could be wrong, right? And that's the same with atheism. So I'm an agnostic atheist, but really,
and
I'm
a monk.
Yeah. And this is where you start getting into, this is a bonus segment at the end here. So this is your epilogue. So the question then is, for some people, are you a strong atheist or positive atheist or a weak atheist or a negative atheist? Now, I feel quite strongly about this, because there are a lot of atheists who say, I have a lack of belief in God. And I think they go down that route because they see a belief as somehow synonymous with a religious scenario, with religion. So I can't have a belief because that's like religion. So I don't have a belief, I have a lack of belief. The thing is, like, you are arguing all day on the internet like a keyboard warrior, like I am, that God doesn't exist, which is to say that you believe the proposition God does not exist. Now, if you're arguing to toss over the fact that God does not exist, then you, on a daily basis, are effectively saying God does not exist. You are assenting to the proposition God does not exist. Therefore, I would say you are a strong atheist. It's not a lack of belief. You have a positive belief that God does not exist. So I think most people who claim to have a lack of belief in God, really, when you push and prod them, are actually strong atheists, and they have a belief that God does not exist.
Yeah.
So I that's how I would define atheism, and I know some atheists don't like that. They really like the fact that they think they have a lack of belief rather than a positive belief. And these sort of things are discussed in philosophical circles. You'll see it in the Cambridge Companion to Atheism by Michael Martin. He discusses that rightfully at the beginning of the book. So yeah, it's worth having a look at. But I'm a strong atheist. I'm a positive atheist. God does not exist.
But you can help Jonathan save his soul from all eternal conscious torment if you subscribe to his YouTube channel and you support what he's doing. We can save him from this wretched world that was created by a good, loving...
Please save me.
Okay. No, seriously, go subscribe to Jonathan. I forgot to mention this at the beginning. He has a YouTube channel where he is a tippling philosopher, which simply means he's sipping on some wine, feeling fine, and whatever rhymes with that, dime for the crime, Anyway, and he's telling you some philosophy. He's getting into stuff. He's mentioning a lot of his books. He is an avid writer. He writes many books. So let me show you the YouTube channel here real quick. That didn't work. Let me do it this way. How about this? Share screen. Here's the YouTube channel. Make sure you go and you hit that little subscribed bell. He has plenty of books on Amazon. This is the one we talked about today. We only got to like number 10 in arguments. We have 20 more to go.
And it's a nice thing I like about this book is it's actually quite a thin book, so you can race through these arguments, and they are just meaty, but quite succinctly and concisely discussed. So.
And you get saved for buying the book. Yeah, also, lots of other books he's got. Just so you know, you can go follow him on Amazon. So any new book that drops, you get an email. Oh, he's got them back there. Hold on, let me pop it up there. Show everybody. Boom, all those. Yeah.
I've got to add that to the list now. That I need to,
Oh, snap. You're going to have to write 2 more just so it doesn't look ridiculous all on its own.
That's right. Yeah.
That's so ridiculous. No, seriously, go get a book or 2 or 3 and you can get them ebook. You can get them. Aren't you on Audible on a few or?
No, I hadn't. No, not.
We're going to work on that. We will at some point. I know you're busy. We got to figure something. We got to get like, what is his name? I can't think right now.
Seth Andrews.
Seth Andrews to read your books. Oh man, that'd be amazing. You also have the blog. It's down in the description. Please go.
Yeah, so that's a media website. OmniGod is a new website that's aimed at giving representation and voice to the non-religious, particularly in America, but worldwide. So please come and join us there. Fantastic content.
And that is in the description. And then, of course, I have the Patreon where I do a lot of work bringing you content. And for those who are Patreon members, early access. Like I just did a video today with, he goes by Yako, which is really like Jaco, Garrick, Gerick, on the origins of Yahweh.
Yeah, so I've written a couple of articles using some of his work that he wrote a great chapter in one of John Loftus's anthologies some time back about exactly what you're saying. So he's a good.
He even told me he stepped out of the arena for a while. He said because he was very active. He was so serious about it. Like I was very serious too, but it didn't take me. I don't think it took me as long to deconvert and to find a way to land the airplane. He said he felt like he had hit a traumatic, like it was bad. Like suicidal thoughts, the whole thing for years coming out of it. Like he lost his identity when he realized that these weren't what he thought they were. And he went into it. He said, I'm going to come on and share. I said, please come share your story. He said, I'll come on and share my story and explain to you how I was looking for arguments to debunk the other side. And of course, as you start to do that, you know, Dr. Robert M. Price said it really well the other day. And then we incorporated this into my article that is going to be published on Dr. Bart Ehrman's blog. And it is the apologist is not on a warpath against the atheist.
Yeah.
He's at war with himself. He's at war. This is what Dr. Price is saying.
It's also defensive to keep other theists in. I mean, that's William Lane Craig, isn't it? He's not writing that book to convince atheists, but it's
right.
It's
I mean,
give ammunition.
As much as there is that challenge, the point that Bob was saying was they're apologists because they have doubts that they want to somehow find clever arguments to suppress. So it is this warpath with himself. In fact, I'm taking a clip that I took from I'm doing some lectures actually online with Bob that I know for a fact you would like. Let me just tease everybody real quick here. Might as well. While I got you here, man. We got to do this. Might as well, right? Everybody's here. You want to stay for the party. At least you can hear it. All right.
This is the kind of mess you get in if your ultimate concern depends upon a dubious historical proposition, a theory, a reconstruction that might wind up being true, might not, or you might never know. So what business do you have saying, yeah, it's got to be true, so I believe it to be true? That's just producing a fault line that is not only going to commit you to dishonesty in your historical work, and every book of apologetics shows that. Victor just gave these great examples. What more do you need, Craig? What more do you need, Gish or D'Souza? How many hundreds of times does this have to be disproven for you to stop using this? There's this this great quote. Tillich says, fundamentalism has demonic aspects in that it splits the conscience of its thoughtful adherents and forces them to repress knowledge of which they are secretly aware. So why is the fundamentalist and the apologist on the warpath? Well, it's against himself. The unbeliever that he goes on crusade against is in his own mind. Certainly my experience, and I believe it's not.
Dude, that's
unusual.
so deep. You have to admit that's so deep. What he just said.
That's a good talk he gives out. I think I've watched that one before.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. I love you, man. I love everybody in the audience. They might wish to see me from their tower in heaven boil in the broth of God's wrath one day. But hey, I love you.
Hope springs eternal. Yes. That would be, if that's going to happen, God knew it was going to happen right from the beginning, and there's really not a lot you can do about it. So, just enjoy life.
Well, Jonathan, what other ways did I miss out anything in promoting you?
No. Thanks, YouTube. Please grab this book, and if you like any of my books, please do put a review on Amazon. It does make a hell of a difference to balance some of the Christian reviews, because it's all partisan like that. But if you don't like any of my books, just forget about it.
Yeah. Help out Jonathan. Let's go drop a review on these books. You've practically read. If you haven't got the book, I'm going to go ahead and just tell people. I mean, like they did the resurrection one with us and the nativity one. You practically read the book by us giving the presentation. Go drop a review based on the information that Jonathan's brought out. I'd love you to buy the book. I'm just saying it'd be awesome to have some positive reviews that balance out the odds. Cause I know that troll, if someone's, what do you call it? Triggered, they're going to go on a warpath and write something just totally lambasting you and trying to make you look bad.
I used to be stalked right at the beginning when I first started writing some of the books, and when I was first sort of blogging, I was stalked by a Catholic priest who was like just a horrible human, and he stalked me all over the internet, and he didn't buy any of my books, but he reviewed, once I reviewed them all, just like giving screeds of like of angry Catholicism or whatever. And it was like, man, how can you be a man of God? You just sound like such a horrible human being. I had to ban him from every single place I was writing at, because he would just, there you go.
Oh, well, let's go and tell Father Dickhead what we really think. And look, hey, love you. Never, ever freaking forget. We are MythVision.
Don't any of you have the guts to play for blood?
I'm your huckleberry. That's just my game.